Twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled
town meeting members who have died since our last town meeting, and we will then have a moment of silence in their honor.
The honor roll for the 2009 annual town meeting is as follows: Barbara Coffin, Shirley Sid, Jonathan Wadley.
Thank you. I call on the town clerk again to swear in the new town meeting members. Mr. Ward?
Would all newly elected and re-elected town meeting members please rise and raise your right hands? Do you solemnly swear or affirm that you will faithfully and impartially discharge all the duties incumbent upon you as a town meeting member, according to the best of your ability and understanding, agreeably to the rules and regulations of the Constitution and the laws of the Commonwealth, and under rules, regulations, and bylaws made under authority thereon? Please say, I do. Congratulations.
Thank you. A few announcements before we start our proceedings. First, I'd like all of you to take out your cell phones. Hold them in your right hand, and with your left hand, push the off button. Thank you. The annual meeting of the Town Meeting Members Association will be held in room 103 in Town Hall on the first floor at 6:30 p.m. on Monday, June 22. You should all have received an announcement of that meeting with your combined reports. I remind you of our seating procedures. Only town meeting members may sit forward of the checker tables other than the front row center, which is reserved for speakers and town staff. The first two rows on my right are reserved for the many members of the press in attendance. Handicapped town meeting members can sit anywhere in the front row. All speakers are reminded to announce your name and precinct. Our usual time limits of 5 minutes will apply, except as announced otherwise by the chair. I remind you to address your questions and comments to the moderator and not to anyone else in the auditorium. We are likely to have a ballot vote on one or more articles during the course of this town meeting, and when we get to the first of these, I will explain the procedure in some detail before we embark on that adventure. The articles on the warrant will be taken in their order with the following exceptions. Article 18, which deals with, it's a zoning article. It deals with separate housing units within certain properties in town. The principal petitioner is out of the country this week and has asked that Article 18 be dealt with first thing on the third evening, which you will all recall is next Tuesday, a week from tonight, June 2nd. Would someone like to make that motion? Is there a second? All those in favor, please say aye. Those opposed, no. The vote is 161 to 1. We will deal with Article 18 either first thing on Tuesday evening, June 2, or in what I consider the unlikely event that we complete all of our other business before we adjourn tomorrow evening. We'll deal with it tomorrow evening. In other words, I won't hold town meeting over to a third session for that single article. Secondly, Article 29, which deals with the renaming of a traffic circle in the Point neighborhood for Paul Pender. I've been asked by Mr. Allen that Article 29 be dealt with first thing tomorrow evening, and to assist the family and permit them to be here at a designated time. Is there a motion to move Article 29 to be heard first thing on Wednesday? Second? Seconded. All those in favor, please say aye. Those opposed, no. The carries unanimously. We'll now, oh yes, and I also remind those of you who are new town meeting members and do not have email, have not joined the Yahoo Town Meeting Members Association Yahoo facility, to see Diana Spiegel, who will raise her hand there, and be put on that list. It's quite an adventure. We now turn to Article 1. The motion on under Article 1 is found on page 1-2. It's moved by Mr. Spiegel and seconded by Mr. Goldstein that the town establish that the number of measures of wooden bark be 2 to be appointed by the selectmen. Mr. Spiegel?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Stanley Spiegel, a town meeting member from Precinct 2. If you'll indulge just for a moment, I wanted to offer congratulations to our newly elected selectman, Ken Goldstein, and our re-elected selectman, Betsy DeWitt. And also to point out that it was 15 years ago that our moderator, Sandy Gasby, and our town clerk, Pat Ward, first presided, as they do over town meeting. They served the town for 15 years, just been reelected, and I wanted to give my personal thanks and appreciation for that.
Thank you, Mr. Spiegel. Please proceed with Article 1.
Okay. For Article 1, speaking for the Advisory Committee, this is a traditional, a throwback to a longer tradition even than the 15 years. It goes back 300 years in our history to appoint measures of wooden bark. Looking at the warrant, I was thinking of moving to change it to measures of wood, bark, and calories, but I was told that would not be within the scope of the warrant. So, although there may be some who would chip away at this tradition, the Advisory Committee unanimously urges town meeting to support it. We do hope town meeting members will be in accord. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Goldstein. It's your maiden voyage as a select person.
Ken Goldstein for a unanimous Board of Selectmen, and thank you, Stanley, for your pithy comments. And the Board of Selectmen unanimously supports favorable action on Article 1. Thank you.
On the motion on page 1-2, those in favor, please say aye. Those opposed, no. Motion carries unanimously. Article 2. Motion is for no action. It's moved by Ms. Daly, seconded by Mr. Traster. Ms. Daly, do you have anything to say about this? This concerns collective bargaining agreements, and we have none before us.
Yes, Nancy Daly for the Board of Selectmen. We're working on them, but none are completed at this time, so that's why we've moved no action.
Mr. Traster?
Thank you, Michael Traster, for the Advisory Committee, Precinct 10 Town Meeting member. The Advisory Committee voted unanimously as well, no action, given that there are no matters within the scope of the warrant article before us.
Thank you. On the no action motion, those in favor, please say aye. Those opposed, no. Motion carries unanimously. Article 3. Motion under Article 3 is found at the bottom of page 3-1. It's moved by Ms. DeWitt, seconded by Mr. Bors, that the town authorize the town treasurer, et cetera, concerning compensating balance agreements. Ms. DeWitt.
This is an annual motion to preserve the option, should it be necessary, to enter into compensating balances. As it happens, we have not, in my experience, and perhaps never, taken advantage of this, but it's important to have it available in case the Chief Financial Officer requires it, so the unanimous Board of Selectmen moves favorable action.
Ms. Orenstein.
I'm Roberta Ornstein, and I'm an at-large member of the Advisory Committee. And by unanimous vote, the Advisory Committee recommends favorable action on Article 3 as presented and approved by the Board of Selectmen.
On the motion, those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. Motion carries unanimously. Article 4. The motion is for no action by Ms. Daly and seconded by Mr. Traster. Ms. Daly.
We have nothing, Nancy Daly for the Board of Selectmen. We have nothing before us under this article at this time, so we are moving no action.
Mr. Traster.
Michael Traster, Precinct 10 Town Meeting member, also speaking for unanimous Advisory Committee recommending no action on warrant Article 4.
On the no action motion, those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. Motion carries unanimously. Article 5 relates to unpaid bills, and there being none, the motion is for no action. Moved by Mr. Traster, seconded by Ms. Daly. Mr. Traster.
Mike Traster, Town Meeting member, Precinct 10. Again, another housekeeping warrant article. This reflects the fact that the town cannot pay unpaid bills for goods purchased by it or services rendered to us unless and until town meeting approves the appropriation. In the past, we've had one or two stray utility bills or computer leases that we've had to deal with. But this year, I think, reflecting much greater fiscal controls and purchasing discipline, we're happy to note that there are none. And accordingly, the Advisory Committee recommends unanimously no action on warrant Article 5.
You wish to add anything, Ms. Daly? On the no action motion under Article 5, those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. Motion carries unanimously. It's not all going to be this easy, ladies. Article 6. Motion under Article 6 is on page 6-2, moved by Mr. Benka and seconded by Mr. Traster, that the town establish an additional property tax exemption, et cetera, in the words of the motion at the top of page 6-2. Mr. Benka.
Thank you. Dick Benka for the Board of Selectmen. This article, which we've passed annually for 20 years, doubles the amount of the property tax exemption for which certain classes of individuals are eligible. The cost would be approximately $57,000 per year. That amount, and actually more, is already set aside in our overlay budget. The exemptions include widows and widowers and the elderly. The exemptions for these classes of individuals are relatively small in number and amount, and the individuals must meet asset and or income tests. There's a small exemption for those who are legally blind, and the largest potential exemption under this article is for disabled veterans. This is the largest both in terms of dollar amounts and in terms of the number of eligible individuals in the town of Brookline. In a sense, this article is particularly timely. At yesterday's Memorial Day commemoration, we heard from our Director of Veterans Services, Bill McGroarty, and from others about the sacrifices of returning veterans, both those returning from the current wars and those who have returned from past wars. In the spirit of that event, I urge you to go beyond the words that were spoken yesterday and to provide some tangible recognition to disabled veterans living in our community. Please join a unanimous Board of Selectmen and a unanimous Advisory Committee in voting favorable action on Article 6. Thank you.
Mr. Traister.
Michael Traister, Town Meeting Member for Precinct 10, again speaking for unanimous Advisory Committee. As Selectman Benka mentioned, this article would allow the town to continue its practice of increasing state-mandated property tax exemptions for several classes of taxpayers. Excuse me. It's to answer some questions that we've asked among ourselves in the Advisory Committee. State law, not the town, sets out who may be and who is not eligible for these exemptions, and likewise, state law sets out the base amount of the exemption, and in some cases, the amounts of the exemptions for which the Commonwealth will reimburse the town. Some exemptions, for instance, for paraplegic veterans cannot legally be doubled in accordance with state law. And if you've not already done so, I would respectfully suggest that you look at page 6-2 in the combined reports and the table we prepared, which sets out the available exemptions. So the matter before us tonight is whether or not to double the state-mandated exemptions as described in that table and the write-ups. And as mentioned, we're allowed tonight to double, as we've done in the past, the state-mandated default exemptions listed in that table, but we cannot, on our own, create new exemptions. And if the exemptions are in fact doubled, that doubling must be uniform across all classes of exemptions. Another fact to keep in mind is that any increased exemption cannot decrease an individual taxpayer's liability below his or her previous fiscal year's amount. And finally, there are some means tests prescribed by the state statute, which are, in some instances, prerequisites to be eligible. We've done this through fiscal thick and thin for 21 straight years, and notwithstanding some of the issues which obviously you're all aware of, and which Harry Boers and others will discuss tonight, it's something that there is a consensus for doing, and it's within the strict constraints of what we legally can and can't do. There does seem a broad consensus for continuing this. The assessor's office estimates that the doubling will cost the town approximately $57,000, not the $66,500 figure indicated in the combined reports. And that's, as mentioned, already baked into the budget. And I asked the question, and the answer is why the decline, and it reflects the fact that there are fewer eligible veterans living in the town. And so before offering our recommendation, we wanted, as we've done in the past, to thank the town assessor's office, especially Gary McCabe, for all the hard work he and his staff do to publicize these exemptions and the other programs available to town residents. Last year, we talked about the tax deferral program available for seniors, and we also learned that by means of his efforts, there's been a much greater participation in that. And we invite anyone watching tonight or anyone within the room who may be interested to either contact the town assessor's department, and they can provide details, or if you go to the town's website and search for the phrase personal exemption, you'll see a whole very detailed and helpful discussion. So by a vote of 19 in favor, none opposed, no abstentions, the Advisory Committee recommends favorable action on this warrant article.
Thank you, Mr. Traister. On the motion at the top of page 6-2, those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. Motion carries unanimously. Article 7. Article 7 deals with year-end adjustments to the fiscal 09 budget. There being none, the motion under Article 7 is for no actions, moved by Mr. Traister and seconded by Ms. Daly. Mr. Traister.
Last one for a while. The unanimous consent, Mike Traister, town meeting member for Precinct 10. The unanimous advisory committee recommends no action on this, in that there are no year-end adjustments that have been proposed.
Ms. Daly? On the no action motion, those in favor, please say aye. Those opposed, no. Motion carries unanimously. Article 8. Article 8 is the budget article. And the budget article is that of the advisory committee, and it is, the motion starts on top of page 8-55 and goes over to page 8-65. I suggest that you all turn to page 8-55 and follow me through as I lead you through the budget article. We will, I'll explain the procedure after we hear from Mr. Bors, who is the moving party, seconded by Ms. Daly. Mr. Bors, you have your usual 10 minutes, should you need them.
I'll use up a full 10. Thank you. Harry Bors speaking on behalf of the Advisory Committee. Welcome to Selectman Goldstein, and welcome back Selectman DeWitt, and welcome to all of you. And thank you to all of my colleagues on the Advisory Committee who often toil in anonymity but work very hard and do a lot of research and writing, and thank you. This has obviously been a rather extraordinary year. Many of us, of course, are now expecting to have to work later into life. We're also recalculating how, or even if, for that matter, we can send our kids off to college. And we all know people who are out of work, perhaps family members. And all of this has come about in rather short order since the world has changed. And it's left many of us feeling somewhat numb. But as town meeting members, elected to represent and safeguard the interests of this community, we must take a deep breath and engage in the thoughtful consideration of our municipal budget, making decisions and making choices. And these are not going to be easy considerations, as our revenues are declining. Towns and cities around us have been laying off teachers and police. They've been closing firehouses and libraries. They've been asking their employees to take unpaid work furloughs. Now, the state is still coming to terms with its financial position, and ultimately, that will impact ours. At this point, frankly, we're still unsure exactly what that will mean, but the budget we're presenting this evening, we believe, is based on what we know and what we think we will nonetheless be able to support. In Massachusetts, we've seen an unprecedented plunge in revenue, and the future offers less assurance than the present, for the state is facing historic deficits with no relief in sight. Obviously, you don't have to be Daniel to read the handwriting on the wall. We know this will be a multi-year challenge. So far, we've been able to avoid the layoffs and the service curtailments of other communities, and that's reflected in this year's budget, which is supported by an estimated $204.4 million in revenue. Now, most of our revenue, 75% of this, comes from property tax, which is primarily residential taxes. This year, that's nearly $153 million, which is up 3.6%. State aid also contributes significantly with $17.2 million, but that's a 13% reduction over last year, and it's going to decrease further in the next few weeks. The overlay surplus and other available funds contribute $7.4 million, and local receipts provide just over $20 million, but we will probably have to revise those down a bit in the coming weeks. Now, though we have increased a number of our fees in the past couple of years, we're still caught in the same secular trend as every other community, and that is a contracting municipal budget. Now, counterbalancing these revenues are our expenses. Departmental expenditures are $62.3 million on the town side and $69 million on the school side. Non-departmental expenditures increase over 6% to just under $57 million. And this includes such things as our employee benefits, which makes up 71% of this entire category. Debt service makes up another 22%, and what remains goes to such things as reserves and insurance. Additionally, we have special appropriations, which include the CIP items, of $9.3 million, and finally, non-appropriated expenses of $7.3 million, and this includes state assessments, which come right off the top. So charged against our $204.4 million in revenues are these $204.4 million in expenses, and after allowing for that $7.3 million in the non-appropriated expenses I just mentioned, we are left with $197.1 million for appropriation, inclusive of CIP. That's an increase of approximately 2.5% over last year. But in the face of this modest increase, we're looking at escalating costs and now severely declining revenues. And there's a tabular breakout on page 831 in the combined reports if you'd like to see it. Now, not surprisingly, more than 3/4 of our $188 million operating budget goes to personnel and benefits. Personnel increases about 0.5% to $103 million, while benefits increases over 5% to $40.3 million. So it's clear from these numbers that we must be mindful of the entire cost of compensation, meaning wages plus benefits, because if one component excessively increases, fiscal reality dictates that another must decrease. Now, our service needs will change over time, so we'll need to establish the most efficient staffing structure that we can, particularly with declining revenues. Now, we strive to avoid layoffs. Instead, we look to reduce headcount through vacancies, through attrition, through retirement. This is not always achievable, but the goal is to do it as humanely as possible. And using this approach, we were able to reduce our payroll costs by $1 million in this FY10 budget, and there's a breakout on 832. We realize that change is not always comfortable, and a number of these proposed changes have been met with trepidation. However, these changes better leverage skill sets, they provide savings, and they maintain employment. And it is precisely this approach that has helped us avoid layoffs this year. Now, as I noted, employee benefits are $40.3 million. They consume more than 21% of our entire operating budget. And group health benefits alone now account for 13% of the operating budget. And this is graphically depicted on page 818. Now, we provide health care benefits to both our active and retired employees, which means health care benefits are for life. The town pays for 75% of the health care premium, which this year alone has increased by 7.8%, meaning that a Blue Choice family plan now costs more than $22,000 a year. Now, we've worked to try and hold these premium costs down in the past couple of years, but health care costs continue to crush our town budget. And if the cost of health care is not reduced, this item will continue to erode other items in our budget, forcing reductions in service, in capital, and personnel. Every dollar we spend on health care is a dollar we cannot spend on another item. Now, for several years, we have sought ways to reduce this cost. In particular, we have discussed moving into the state's Group Insurance Commission, the GIC. We've discussed it here on the floor of town meeting. The current estimates are that such a move could save Brookline up to $4 million annually and save our employees an additional $1.25 million annually. It's a plan that allows for a choice of different providers, though not Blue Cross and Blue Shield, but certainly would still be able to see your same physicians. Now, there are some higher deductible levels for plans within the GIC, and this has some of our employees concerned. However, the overall premium savings are greater than the increases in copay. Now, other collaborative health groups have been explored, but they do not provide the same level of savings, stability, nor predictability of the GIC. And some current members are in fact now considering switching into the GIC. The bottom line is the GIC offers very significant savings, and we have until October to make a decision to join, but it requires a minimum 70% affirming vote of our union membership. Now, the reality is, if we fail to seize these savings, we will then need to compensate for our significant health care costs elsewhere in the budget. Now, our other two large employee benefit cost centers are pensions and retiree health. The payment required toward the pension this year, the FY10 budget, is $12.1 million. This is a $642,000 increase. But given the collapse in the financial markets, we can expect the required annual contribution to the pension to go up markedly in the next few years. Potentially, this may increase to an additional $2.5 to $5 million by FY12, and this will exert greater pressure on our operating budget. And hand in glove with our pension obligations are our retiree health obligations. As I mentioned, health care benefits are for life. Now, we currently meet these obligations on a pay-as-you-go approach, but that's obviously hazardous. The calculated unfunded liability for our retiree health obligation is between $240 and $300 million. Now, though our pay-as-you-go approach has worked and may continue to work for some time, with each successive year and premium increase, it takes a larger and larger bite out of our operating budget, pushing off the inevitable. This year, for the first time, the budget contains a specific line item for post-retirement health care, also referred to as OPEBs or other post-employment benefits. The OPEB line is funded with $250,000 this first year, and it's envisioned that this amount will increase by an additional $250,000 in each successive year, so that incrementally, over an employee's work life of 30 years, this approach will contribute more than $16 million toward the retiree health care fund. Now, this is not in and of itself a complete solution, but it is an important element. It provides discipline and stability, and more importantly, it avoids us pushing off a crushing expense onto the backs of our children. Now, aside from our operational expenses, we have capital expenses as well, and this year's proposed capital improvement plan anticipates authorizing approximately $15 million. Now, that's inclusive of free cash, of override funds, reappropriations, and other funds. Now, as you know, our financial guidelines call for applying 5.5% of the prior year's net revenues toward our CIP. Now, that's not a magic number, but it is one that has served us pretty well. This budgetary discipline has allowed us to satisfy fundamental capital needs, provide stability and predictability, and prevent us from backsliding into a crumbling infrastructure. But this year, proposed for the FY10 budget, is a recommendation to reduce that to 5%, with a plan to increase it next fiscal year to 5.25% and return to the full 5.5% by FY12. And it's important that we do make it back up to that 5.5% level, or we risk losing some capital projects altogether, and in particular, we may risk making the devotion school project unattainable. But for FY10, this approach will provide us with some budgetary flexibility as we continue to restructure. But even at this lower level, this 5% level, the FY10 CIP continues its commitment to such things as sidewalk rehabilitation, energy conservation, town and school improvements, and technology. Now, we'll be going through the CIP items later, so I'm not going to dwell on each of them, but there is a breakout in the combined reports with descriptions. However, there's also a significant special appropriation item in this year's budget, though it's not technically a CIP item. It's $3.2 million for corrective action around the Newton Street landfill. Now, in the 1950s, a private developer used town incinerator ash as fill. While perhaps misguided, it was legal at the time. Now, however, that ash must be removed and/or capped. The developer is long gone, and the town is legally required to perform the cleanup. The town has worked closely with the residents and the state to formulate a remediation plan. And since FY04, town meeting has authorized $8 million toward these sorts of corrective actions. And the FY10 appropriation will complete the funding needed for removal and restoration. It's an action that is both required and right. And again, the full list of CIP items are in the combined report. The final budget item that I would like to touch on is the school department. As on the town side, the schools must contend with decreases in local revenue and reduced state aid. In addition, the schools must also confront reductions at Chapter 70 aid, decreases in the so-called circuit breaker funding. This is money that goes towards SPED costs. And I should mention parenthetically that Massachusetts now ranks, I believe, 49th in the nation in terms of its funding for SPED. Now, how severe this will be is still to be determined, but the schools will take a significant hit, likely in excess of $1 million. That's over and above everything else. Also, METCO funding is decreasing for the third time in a year, and adding to the financial pressure is an increase in kindergarten enrollment and the associated demands for space and staff that go along with it. Now, this year's school budget shortfall has required the department to pare back. Among the reductions are positions at the high school, including administrative, clerical, and teaching staff, the loss of a METCO social worker, 15 aide positions, and the elementary library assistants in the grade schools. The school department is looking for new ways to consolidate and streamline their programs, as well as reducing out-of-district placement costs, and part of this effort will be guided by its recently established strategic committee. The schools are one of Brookline's core strengths, but with state aid declining and enrollments increasing, we will need to be creative and we will need to be collaborative if we are going to maintain this community's educational legacy. Now, there's much more to be said on this budget, and I suspect the superintendent or a member of the school committee will later elaborate. So in closing, I would like to refer back to the point I made earlier. We are contending with a multi-year challenge. Now, I know budgets tend to be viewed in the here and now, which means that too often we may view future issues merely as bridges that we can worry about crossing later. But we have a fundamental problem. Our growth in expenses is greater than our growth in revenues, and this is simply unsustainable. The chart on page 8-23 graphically illustrates the consequence, which is widening deficits. So this year and for the next couple of years, it is important that we resist that temptation to consider our budget only as a transaction. We must consider this budget and the successive budgets together as part of a process. We shouldn't consider the budget cycle in a state of panic or crisis necessarily, but we must recognize the urgency. We face significant challenges that will require fundamental changes in the way we do business. Brookline's demonstrated its capacity to contend with these challenges in the past, and through thoughtful decisions and balanced sacrifice, we will undoubtedly find ways to do it again. On that cheery, uplifting note, it is my privilege on the part of the Advisory Committee to recommend favorable action on the budget as presented. I should also note there is a resolution offered within the budget itself, which the Advisory Committee took up just prior to coming in, and the recommendation on that by a vote of 14-5-2 is for referral, and I suspect that will get discussed in more detail later. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Daly?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Good evening. I am Nancy Daly, speaking for the Board of Selectmen, and I also want to welcome Ken Goldstein to our board and Betsy DeWitt back again, and welcome all of you who are new town meeting members. And in particular, I want to welcome a new town meeting member from Precinct 16, Bob Allen. And I want to thank you for your 9 years of service on the Board of Selectmen. It actually is a much tougher job than it looks to you sitting out there. We can't walk down the street without getting complaints from people, and I know that Bob spent countless hours away from his family and his law practice at meeting after meeting, and he's always tried to do what's right for the town. So thank you, Bobby. Well, thank you to Harry Bors for doing his usual thorough job in detailing the town's $230 million financial plan for us. The entire advisory committee for their huge investment of time and effort in working through this difficult budget period. And I also want to express appreciation for the collaborative efforts of our elected partners on the school committee. To say that these are extraordinary times is a vast understatement. The country has witnessed things over the past year that we once thought unimaginable. Harry went into some of the issues we're facing, and clearly the economic factors have affected state and local budgets across the country and here in the Commonwealth. The Commonwealth has had to reduce its revenue estimates for the current fiscal year 4 times, totaling nearly $3 billion, which triggered cuts to various local aid accounts in the current fiscal year, and even more in the budget that's before you for the upcoming year. In Brookline, we lost aid from lottery funds, a category called additional assistance, METCO, the circuit breaker funding for special education, and a number of grants and other categories. For fiscal year 10, the state is now using base revenue figures that are even less than the revised fiscal 09 estimate, requiring the legislature and the governor to develop spending plans that cut into programs across the board. They are also considering increasing some various taxes, and primarily the sales tax. The state budget is not yet final, as Harry told you, as the House and Senate currently have different versions. So we have continued to try to anticipate where we think they might end up, and the budget before you in Article 8 is based on our best guess. All of this has made the jobs of the town administrator, Rich Kelleher, deputy town administrator, Sean Cronin, finance director, Steve Cirillo, school superintendent, Bill Lupini, and deputy superintendent for finance, Peter Rowe, their jobs have been very difficult this year. And I am pleased to say that Brookline is truly blessed to have outstanding staff leadership in these areas. In particular, on the board, we work very closely with Rich Kelleher and his staff, and I have to say that I believe the reason Brookline is facing this very serious financial crisis in better shape than almost any other community surrounding us is due to the outstanding work of Rich and his staff. Thank you. So while the budget before you tonight is based on the governor's budget proposal from January, that actually falls between the current House and Senate versions, so we think it's still some reasonable assumptions to work on. It suggests cuts of local aid of $2.6 million. This was a significant driver of the $4 million deficit that the town and school administrations had to work around for this upcoming budget. Our expectations have risen and fallen as the budget has gone through the legislative process. The House Ways and Means proposal was submitted in mid-April with deeper cuts. The final House budget was better for us. It included a 25% increase in the sales tax, from which money was added back to local aid. The budget then lurched through the Senate with more cuts and a few additions, and the Senate's final budget also included a sales tax increase, although it was not earmarked for local aid. They are, however, recommending a local option meals tax of 2%, but should we decide, and this body would be the one voting on that, to pass that local option meals tax, if that is what ends up in the final budget, we would not really get any benefit from that until the final quarter of fiscal year 10, because it would take that long to kick in and get the revenue back from it. So based on the Senate budget, we're currently at a low local aid cut that is about $1.3 million greater than what is presumed in the budget before you. But as I said, the process is not yet done. Is Frank Smisek here? I want Frank to know from our state rep at the House that we want him to continue working on getting some of that local aid money back to us. And we hope by the time they finally come to agreement, it will be slightly better for us. On top of that revenue pressure, as Harry said, our own economically sensitive local receipts, such as interest income particularly, continue to be negatively impacted by the economy. And surprisingly, although we raised the fee on your parking tickets, people have chosen to be very careful about how long they're staying at those meters and where they're parking. So that has actually gone down as well. The expenditure side of the budget ledger also poses challenges, emanating, as Harry mentioned, from the continued growth in health insurance and other fixed costs. In the 3-year period beginning with fiscal year 07 and through fiscal year 09, the health insurance budget increased $4.1 million, or 22%, in those 3 budget years. To put that into perspective, more than 40 cents of each new property tax dollar from the annual 2.5% levy increase has gone toward funding health insurance for current and retired employees. Mr. Kelleher and his staff have worked diligently with the representatives of the town's unions toward joining the state's group insurance commission or some similar program, and we've not yet been able to get to agreement on that issue, but I believe we are making progress. On the overall budget, the witch's brew of revenue reductions with continuing growth in budget busters such as the health insurance give us a budget scenario that requires and will continue to require some unpleasant choices. The ability to maintain our high level and quality of services is in jeopardy. Sacrifices are required by everyone, and the budget before you tonight includes such sacrifices. 18 town positions have been eliminated. most of those through attriting out positions that were currently vacant. The school department was going to have to eliminate 38 positions. They have gotten some federal stimulus money, so they've been able to get that number down for this year at least to about 17.4 positions, and most of those are coming in the aides and administrative staff, because the schools are continuing to experience rising enrollment, so they're not really able to cut teacher positions. Reorganizations and consolidations are planned beginning July 1st. In some cases, we have had to move around long-time employees to handle other spots and to kind of merge things as best we can. Funding for the capital budget is cut from our longtime policy of 5.5%, as Harry said, to 5%. I personally am a firm believer that strong fiscal policies help us weather these economic storms, but we did not feel that the operating budget should bear all the cuts this year without some of the burden falling on the capital budget. We expect and we need to return to our longstanding fiscal policies next year so that our level of debt does not become unendurable in terms of the balance of the budget. The budget also includes a number of recommendations of the Efficiency Initiative Committee. That group of residents did a tough job. They looked at all areas of the budget, including some of the sacred cows, to see if they could find any areas where possible cuts could be made. They have taken quite a bit of criticism for their work, but I want to thank them for a lot of hard work and tough-mindedness. And several of their budget recommendations are included in this budget, and I'm sure we will have to be considering some other of their recommendations in the future. Among those included in this budget are the civilianization of certain police and fire functions, consolidation of the fire department wires division with DPW, pooling of clerical resources in the health building, elimination of the zoning administrator position, which will be done by the building commissioner as well as the building commissioner job, and more than 25% reduction in the number of take-home vehicles by town employees. I also wanted to note, as Harry mentioned, there is $250,000 in this budget to go toward our OPEB liability. OPEBs are things other than pensions for retirees, and that's primarily health insurance. We had and continue to have a compact with our employees that the town will provide health insurance for them and their families into retirement. Most spend some of their retirement on the town's health insurance and the rest on Medicare, which we also have to pay something toward. The town has a staggering liability for that benefit now for those who are retired, and the liability also for what we know we're going to have to pay for current employees as they get toward retirement. That figure is, as Harry said, somewhere in the mid 200 to 300 million. We have only funded about 6 million of that. And by that, we're doing better than many other communities which haven't funded it at all. But it is still a serious issue for us. We've had a great committee looking at this issue, and one of their recommendations was to begin funding this, and that's why the $250,000 is in this budget. And you may wonder why it's in there in such a difficult year, and the answer is that due to the rising cost of health insurance and the continued growth of this liability, it would take more and more of the operating budget to fund OPEBs as we go along if we continue on the pay-as-you-go method. And in fact, in 30 years from now, it's estimated it would take the entire operating budget to fund this. So obviously that's not acceptable, and we have to begin working on that number. Given the uncertainties of the state budget, you may be wondering about the reality of the budget that's before you. Quite honestly, there may be further cuts, and both the town and school administrations are already working out plans to deal with those cuts if they're necessary. However, we have worked very hard to maintain town services to minimize layoffs, and we join the advisory committee in believing that in this budget provides a basis for getting through this upcoming budget year as smoothly as possible. While we don't know the final numbers and cuts to local aid from the state, we have strong evidence that for Brookline they will be between 1.9 million and 3.9 million, which is the range within which we used to to develop this financial plan. I wish I could tell you that I'm seeing light at the end of the tunnel, but unfortunately, it appears that fiscal 11 and 12 will be as challenging as fiscal 10 and perhaps more so. At the conclusion of fiscal year 09, the state's rainy day fund, which began 09 with a balance of $2.1 billion, will be less than $1 billion, leaving little for future years. Further exacerbating the state's fiscal woes, federal stimulus monies are being used to plug budget gaps to a much greater extent than originally expected. Both of these issues will create more stress on the budget in the upcoming years. Locally, we were moving briskly along to fully fund our pension plan, as required by the state, but the money we've invested in the pension plan sustained heavy losses recently, as did everybody else's money that was invested. And we will have to make that up beginning in fiscal year 12. The increase in the required appropriation could be an increase of $5 million in fiscal year 012 just for the pension fund. That alone exceeds the normal 2.5% growth in the property tax levy. This all points to a forecasted deficit of more than $14 million by fiscal year 14. And we understand that we cannot expect taxpayers to increase their taxes through overrides too frequently, and that we are going to have to continue to drive toward efficiencies, particularly in the area of health care costs, in order to reach that magic level of sustainability. This is a critical year for the unions and the towns to work together to agree on a long-term resolution to our overwhelming health insurance cost increases. I'd like to conclude tonight by taking a quote from President Obama and tailoring it to Brookline. Our Brookline history is not and never has been about things coming easy. It's about rising to the moment when the moment is hard, converting crisis into opportunity, and seeing to it that we emerge from whatever trials we face stronger than we were before. Brookline has always been a leader in solving tough issues, and I'm confident we can work together to solve our current problems with intelligence, budget discipline, and a focus that balances human needs with long-term problems. Thank you. The unanimous Board of Selectmen joins the Advisory Committee in urging favorable action on the budget as it's laid out in Article 8. We have voted for referral to the Transportation Board on the Welland Road resolution.
Thank you, Ms. Daly. Now, I suggest that you open your combined reports to page 8-55, the beginning of the budget vote at the top of that page. The first section of the budget consists of the so-called conditions of appropriations. These are paragraphs 1 through 12 from the top of page 8-55 over to the top of page 8-59. I will simply read the titles of these paragraphs so that you'll get an idea of the contents of these rules for the conditions of appropriations. Paragraph 1, transferred among appropriations. Paragraph 2, procurement contracts and leases. 3, allocation of salary adjustments. Paragraph 4, salaries of elected officials. 5, vacant positions. 6, the Golf Enterprise Fund. 7, the Water and Sewer Enterprise Fund. 8, revolving funds. 9, schoolhouse maintenance and repair. 10, snow and ice budget. 11, interfund transfers. And 12, budgetary reporting. We will proceed through the balance of the budget, item by item. There are some items that require a special vote, where there's a more than majority vote required, and we will vote on those, actually 2 items. There will be a discussion under item 39 of a motion resolution being offered under that discussion item, and then we will go through the departmental budgets on page 8-63, the non-departmental expenditures at the bottom of page 8-63 and 8-64. Then we will have a final omnibus budget vote, which will call for approval of the entire budget. The next section of the budget consists of special appropriations. All but one of these are capital items, and they are numbered item 34 through 57 on page 8-59 through 8-62. I will read the gist of each of these items, each of these capital items, and if you have questions about any of them, before you ask your questions, I recommend that you consult with the expanded description of these items that are found on pages 8-44 through 8-53. For instance, the first of these, item 34, $75,000 for the removal of the pump house at Route 9 in Warren, is amplified on page 8-44 as item number 1 at the bottom, and that may answer your questions. So consult with those before you ask your questions. Proceeding now through the items 34, etc. 34 is the appropriation of $75,000 for the removal of the pump house and transformer buildings near the intersection of Route 9 and Warren Street at the Brookline Reservoir. Mr. Golden?
Jack Golden, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 8. I think that this site has been, my impression is this site has been under construction. At least I've seen activity there for several years now. Can we know if this is the final funds to be allocated for this demolition?
Ms. Daly? Let's hope so.
I think the work you have seen there and the trucks and things had to do with the state rebuilding of Route 9. That was not a town project that was going on there. They were using that as a place to stage their work on Route 9. So our project has not begun.
So Mr. Golden's question is $75,000 adequate to complete the removal of the pump house and transformer buildings?
Yes, that's
Thank
my
you.
understanding.
Item 35, $239,000 for the enhancement of townwide hardware and software. 36, $350,000 for the refurbishment of fire engine number 4. 37, $1 million for the purchase of a fire engine. And to meet the appropriation, raise $475,000 from the tax levies, transfer $255,000 from the overlay surplus account, etc., and the various other items from various sources. And there's one correction. And the fourth line from the bottom of that item calls for the transfer of $80,945 from the balance remaining in an appropriation from 2006. That number should be $80,470. Item 38, $1,700,000. Yes, sir. Mr. Allen.
Just a question on number 37, Bobby Allen, Precinct 16. Relative to the purchase of a new vehicle, a Quint vehicle, it's a little bit confusing the way it's drafted up. Originally, the request was for a $550,000 engine, a pumper engine. Then as a result of, I believe it was something to do with the Pierce School Auditorium, additional money was able to be used to purchase a Quint. My comment is, I understand that the selectmen will be doing a study this coming summer relative to manning and other issues and how manning affects our homeowners insurance. And I'm wondering, since the need is for an engine for $550,000, should we really be putting an extra $600,000 into purchasing a Quint, a vehicle which arguably requires additional men on it, before we have this study? Or perhaps the $550,000 should be approved for the engine, and the $600,000 could go into a one-time fund. I know the pension obligations that the Chairman Daley brought up is something that the extra money could certainly go into.
Mr. Benka?
Thank you. There actually are two points that should be made. First, the quint was requested and recommended by the department should the funds be available. Essentially what a quint is a truck that performs 5 different functions, hence the name quint. Among those are both a ladder function and a pumper function, so it does provide more flexibility to the department. Secondly, we have quints within our current fire department, and those, like all the trucks in the department, are each manned with 4 people. There's no additional manning on a quint. All of the trucks are manned with 4 individuals.
Do you have your questions answered, Mr. Allen?
Well, I'm not sure that, not to challenge Selectman Banker, I believe this would be the first quint that the town will have, a first true quint, and I'm wondering if perhaps the fire chief could provide a little information. It seems to me that, and I would like to move that $550,000 be appropriated for an engine rather than additional $600,000 to put in for this quint.
So you're moving to, well, it's not quite that simple, Mr. Allen, because there are, it's not only an appropriation, but the sources of the appropriation. So you'll have to identify for us where the reduction of $450,000 is going to come from. I assume from the appropriation from the tax revenues?
That's correct.
Okay, well, we'll deal with that after we hear from the chief, if you continue to wish to make that motion. Chief?
Good evening. First of all, I'd like to make one correction that a quint does not need more than the current engine or ladder truck manning that we currently have. As Selectman Banker mentioned, we now have 4 firefighters on each piece of apparatus, and as long as a quint is used as either a pumper or a ladder truck at the scene of a fire, all that's required by the standards, the NFPA standards, is that they have that same 4-person minimum. And secondly, we do currently have a quint in service. The moderator mentioned a few moments ago that the fire department is looking for $350,000 to refurbish the 9-year-old quint that we have. And I believe it's the most versatile piece of equipment we have in the fire department. And at a time when money is certainly a concern in the fire department, the addition of a quint would be absolutely fantastic to the fire department and would add greatly to the operational capabilities of the fire department. There are some who question the need for a quint right now, especially at the cost of $1 million or thereabouts. Again, as fire chief, I have to look not only at this coming year's budget and this coming year's concerns for the fire department. I have to look 2, 3, 4, 5 years down the road. And 4 years down the road, we may not have the same fire department that we have today. And I have to prepare for that. And one of the ways I will do that is by looking at the quint apparatus, which, as many of you know, I have 2 main goals right now in the fire department. That's to keep all 5 firehouses open. And the second goal is to keep all responses to all types of fires, car fires, dumpster fires, medical emergencies, building fires, exactly the same as they are today. And with this addition of this quint apparatus, which is indeed expensive, I will be able to accomplish those goals. The fire department will have capabilities to leave all 5 firehouses open and have the same response patterns with the same numbers of firefighters responding to each incident. No matter if cuts to the fire department take effect a year from now, 2 years from now, whenever. And if the fire department does not incur cuts in the coming years, and I strongly advise that I would like to see the current 5 engines and 2 ladder trucks remain in effect. If the fire department does not incur cuts, this new quint apparatus will still be an outstanding addition to the fire department.
Now, Chief, Mr. Allen is proposing that appropriation be reduced by $450,000. Would you, to purchase some other piece of equipment, I gather. Would you comment on that proposal?
Yes, if the original proposal was, as Mr. Allen mentioned, for $550,000 for a combined rescue pumper. If we go that route, and if there are cuts in the coming years to the fire department, I cannot guarantee that all 5 firehouses will remain open. I also cannot guarantee that the Brookline Fire Department will continue to meet NFPA 1710 standards, which requires a pumper to respond to all parts of the town within 4 minutes of dispatch. If we do not get the Quint, we still will need $550,000 for another pumper, and we will not be able to, I cannot guarantee the response times that the standards recommend.
Okay, Mr. Allen, do you want to make your motion?
No, Mr. Moderator, I think it was important for the fire chief to explain the importance of keeping the existing manning levels and the existing number of companies in the fire department.
Thank you. You can step down, Chief. Item 38, $1,720,000 for the rehabilitation of streets. Mr. Safer.
Josh Safer, Precinct 16. I think that within this allocation, or included anyway in their budget, is the enforcement for sidewalk snow removal by DPW. And my question actually relates to the resolution of town meeting from fall of '08, asking the selectmen to create a different and unified and more regular sidewalk snow removal enforcement policy. And I'm wondering what the status of that might be.
Mr. DeMaio, we're started the snow a little early.
Tom DeMaio, Commissioner of Public Works. The specific question was relative to sidewalk complaints. Is that true?
Yeah, why don't you restate? I didn't quite understand it, Mr. Safer, myself.
All right. So the current situation is that the town is divided into 4 quadrants for enforcement of sidewalk snow removal. The resolution of town meeting in the fall of '08.
Well, hold on,
Yeah.
Mr. DeMaio. This item doesn't have to do with snow removal, does it? It has to do with
No, it does not. It's-
rehabilitation of streets. We'll get to snow removal at some point, Mr. Safer, but this is not that point.
So we'll take that up at that point. You got it.
Item 39, $100,000 for traffic calming studies and improvements. And under this item is a motion being offered by Dr. Sperber, seconded by Ms. LaPlante, for a resolution which appears on the blue supplement, which would direct that a portion of the, or urge the Transportation Board to utilize a portion of the traffic calming budget for work on Welland Road, which Dr. Sperber will now explain to us. So it's moved by Dr. Sperber, seconded by Ms. LaPlante. Call on Dr. Sperber. And Mr. Warren, would you please come forward?
Robert Sperber, Precinct 6. In 1999, the town meeting at that time voted to support the neighbors in their opposition to closing Greeno Street on a full-time basis, and further urged that if some accommodation was made on this issue, that traffic calming devices be installed in the area to provide for the safety of both high school students and children living in the area. In the year 2000, the Transportation Board, in carrying out the wishes of the town meeting, on a motion by Fred Levitan, who was the chairman, and supported by 4 other members, on a vote of 5-1, voted various changes to the traffic pattern in that area, and furthermore, voted traffic calming devices, speed bumps in particular, on Welland Road, 2 of them, south of Stanton Road, and on Welland Road, north of Tappan Street. Subsequently, the Traffic Department, Transportation Department, and the Public Works Department put in traffic calming devices on Greeno Street, on Tappan Street, and on Davis Avenue, and they've worked very well. Welland Road, which then, on the basis of closing Greeno on school days from 9 to 4, saw an increase in traffic from 350 cars a day to 1,300 cars. Also, the character of this particular street has changed tremendously. Whereas in 1999-2000, there were only 8 small children living on the area, today there are 32. The neighbors have assessed that from time to time, even though the speed limit is 20 miles an hour, there have been cars going clocked at 8 to 11 miles above the speed limit, and in some cases, some cars were clocked at 40 miles an hour. There already have been 2 accidents, one involving hitting a parked car as a result of speeding, and in another case, a pet dog was hit. Now, we're suggesting that a vote was made, I would suggest this is a moral contract, was made by both the Transportation Department and as a result of the influence of town meeting at that time, to complete all the street calming. It was done in 3 streets, but the street that needed it the most did not receive any support. If you vote to refer this back to the Transportation Department, this will ensure that nothing will be done during 2009. The very earliest will be 2010. That's an 11-year wait of votes approved by the very department that you're asking to go back to. So we would urge you to support our resolution, which would ask the Transportation Board and Department to take some of the funds that have been allocated in this budget of $100,000 and apply it to the Welland Road speed bumps as promised 10 and 11 years ago. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Sperber reminds me that the Selectmen and Advisory Committee have moved by Ms. Daly and seconded by Mr. Bors, to refer the subject matter of this resolution, that is the traffic calming on Welland, back to the Transportation Board. So we will deal with that motion to refer before we get to this resolution. In the meantime, Dr. Warren.
Thank you. Henry Warren, town meeting member for Precinct 6, member of the school committee. Dr. Sperber has been very complete. Just add briefly that the uphill side of Welland Road is where all the residential houses, downhill side is where the high school is and where we are at the moment. Dogs, balls, and children roll downhill very easily and roll into the line of traffic, which does get up ahead of steam as it approaches the stoplight down at Tappan Street. So I would concur and ask that town meeting support this resolution. Thank you.
Yes, Ms. Daly.
Nancy Daly for the Board of Selectmen. I want to just explain why we're referring it back to the Transportation Board. They have already begun to work on this problem, and Todd Corain, who from our Transportation Department, explained that because of the hill and the fact that it is a somewhat winding hill, they would actually need to do some engineering studies to make sure that the traffic calming measures were done correctly in this instance, and that they are willing to move ahead with this, but there's no way that they could complete the appropriate engineering and actually implement by September of 2009, which was the date in the resolution. And with the board is strongly in favor of traffic calming on this street, and we did refer it back, but we've agreed to send a letter to the Transportation Board expressing our strong support for doing some traffic calming on this street as expeditiously as possible, but we think it needs to be done correctly.
Thank you. Mr. Levitan and Mr. Kane, would you please come forward?
There are Fred Levitan, town meeting member, precinct 14, member of the advisory committee. The vote that was taken in 2000 was a vote to traffic calm an entire area around the high school. It included Stanton Road, Gorham Road, Davis Avenue, Tappan Street. It included raised elements in each of these locations, numerous raised elements. The Transportation Board very quickly realized after its vote that raised elements were not proper for the high school, the area around the high school, or for Brookline in general. They were fought by the chief of police, by the captain of traffic, by our fire chief at the time, and by numerous town department heads, including the Department of Public Works. The Transportation Board subsequently voted to raise the intersection at Tappan, Greenough, and Sumner Road, which we have right outside of us, and to install one raised crosswalk on Davis Avenue. That is all the traffic calming that was done, with the exception of the neck down in front of the high school itself, right at the turn from Davis Avenue to Greenough Street. There was no further traffic calming that was intended to be implemented. There was none that was necessary at that time. I question whether there is any that is necessary at this time. I ask that referral go back to the Transportation Board so that it can be studied. No engineering work was done in 2000. There are no plans that are ready for this movement. This calls for the expenditure of funds this summer. This is not how we budget the expenditure of traffic calming funds. We have a Transportation Board to do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kane.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Brian Kane, Precinct 6. I'm a member of the Transportation Board. At our May 7th meeting, the Transportation Board heard a presentation by the Transportation Division of DPW requesting no action on this measure. However, the board unanimously opposed that measure, voted 5-0 for further study of this measure. We heard a presentation. The town's own data said that every 100 seconds, a car travels down Welland Road at over 29 miles an hour. The speed limit is 20 miles an hour. Welland Road is a school zone. I would ask that we support the measure. The 2009 version of the Transportation Board supports traffic calming measures on Welland Road, and I believe we should move as expeditiously as possible on this. Thank you.
So you're in favor of Dr. Sperber's resolution, is that correct, sir?
That is correct.
Mr. Rosenthal?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Marty Rosenthal, Precinct 9. I have a question on the amount of the $100,000 as it relates to the resolution, or actually as an abstract proposition. Some of you will remember I've been a proponent of keeping this as a line item in the budget, which it is, and some of the language on page 8-60 I think I helped write on the as an amendment. The question is, how does the $100,000 compare to the past years? It's just hitting me that that's less than past years, and the second part of that question, if the moderator would permit it, is there other money in the budget that would go towards traffic calming other than this $100,000? Maybe Mr. DeMayo, Mr. Ditto.
Mr. Crane.
Thank you.
Todd Crane, Transportation Administrator for the town of Brookline. The $100,000 in the CIP this year, last year it was $75,000. The year before that, I believe it was $50,000. So it has gone down and gone back up. The way that we were able to justify the $100,000 amount is we have two projects. One is designed, approved, and ready to go. That is the Riverway Island neighborhood project. We had budgeted it for $75,000. The bids went out and came back in our favor. I believe it was about $64,000. So we did pick up some excess money there. The second project that we had budgeted $25,000 for was the Stedman Street School Improvement Zone. Stedman Street, as you know, is a school zone. It requires safety improvements to deal with the pedestrians and the bicycles for elementary school children that are there. We did our initial showcase of the safety improvement plan before the Transportation Board on Thursday. They requested that we go back and do additional work. So that project will most likely be in excess of $25,000 and take up what we had saved on the Riverway Island neighborhood.
Yeah, Mr. Rosenthal?
Just trying to, Todd, if I could get clarification on the other part of my question. Is there other money other than this $100,000 in the operating budget or anywhere for traffic calming?
Not to my knowledge.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Safer, and Mr. Safer, the proper time to bring up the snow removal budget is when we get to the DPW budget.
Josh Safer, Precinct 16. Thank you. I always think better early than late on these, however. I'm also a new member of the Transportation Board, along with Brian Kane. And the main point I want to make here is that this did not come to the Transportation Board. It did not appear to us to be a particularly controversial request, the idea that there be traffic calming, not to the current board in any case. But I'm still going to suggest that we vote against for the sole reason being that it's impractical, that there's no way we can have anything up and operational by September of 2009 over the next few months. Even voting against, don't think that will be, that's hostile to the concept. The current Transportation Board is not at all hostile to the concept, is not delaying. Most of us, this is the first that we were aware of it, and perhaps that's an unfortunate oversight, but that's the reality. And we are taking it very seriously, and we are investigating it, and we'll move forward.
So you're in favor of the motion to refer, is that correct, sir?
So I'm in favor of the motion to
Thank you.
refer for practical reasons only.
Mr. Wyszynski?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Neil Wyszynski, Precinct 5. I'd just like some clarification from something Mr. Corain just said. If we were to vote this resolution, would other projects be pushed back? And if so, which ones?
Mr. Corain? I think the answer is no.
The answer is yes. We have budgeted.
There we go.
We have a budgeted $100,000 for 2 existing projects. Since Riverway Island is ready to go, that will proceed. If we move ahead with this, we will have to push back the Stedman School Zone Safety Project until FY11.
Well, that's not really the gist of the resolution. The resolution is to urge the Transportation Board to utilize a portion of this budget. It still leaves it up to the Transportation Board. In any case, Mr. Bassett?
John Bassett, Precinct 6.
Just trying to save a little face for myself.
We've waited 9 years for this. If Stedman Street, which sounds like a good project, has to wait a year, so be it. This is time for us not to pass this, as the moderator has just pointed out, simply a resolution. For us to not pass this is, in a way, to be complicit with a delay that should not have happened. I just want to thank also Eve LaPlante, Ginny LaPlante, and the residents of Welland Road, which is the street right out here, to thank those residents for bringing this forward. We shouldn't have waited this long. It can be done, if not by September of this year, then in the spring of 2010. Putting it off for another year is not justified. Please support the resolution to get it done this year.
Mr. Levitan?
Fred Levitan, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 14. Mr. Moderator, could you ask Mr. Corain or someone from DPW to give us or the police department to give us the accident data for Welland Road? We have some 10 years of data.
Do you have that data, Mr. Corain?
For our May meeting of the Transportation Board, like Josh said, There is only one existing member that dated back to the 2000 vote, and all staff is brand new. Not brand new, but does not date back to the 2000 vote. So we wanted to go back and get an idea of what happened back then compared to right now. So we went back 9 years, all accidents on Welland Road since 2000. There have been 7 reported accidents in 9 years, so less than 1 accident per year. There have been no accidents involving pedestrians. There have been no accidents involving cyclists. 3 accidents included damage to town property. A moving vehicle struck the trees that are on the tree lawn. There has only been 1 accident which included personal injury when a single vehicle struck a parked car. That was the accident that happened this year, and that motorist was cited before taken away in an ambulance. So again, 7 accidents, 9 years.
Thank you, Ms. Jonas.
Elisa Jonas, Precinct 16. I just wanted to get a clarification from the Transportation Board. Are they in favor of doing this, but they don't think it can get done by the year 2009, and that's the problem, or that it still needs to be evaluated to make the determination of whether it should be done? And if it's just that 2009 is too soon, if there's some way to change the resolution to make it for later.
Dr. Safer, can you respond to that?
Yeah, I can say that, we're certainly very, very open. I would say we're in favor of traffic calming. It's simply a matter of, number one, we couldn't possibly get this done by September. And so that in that sense, it's a bit silly. And the second is we want to be thoughtful because we may be able to do even stronger traffic calming maneuvers than are proposed, and we'd hate to be forced to do these specific measures when we might even come up with something better.
Well, of course, the resolution is going to force you to do that, but I appreciate the points. Mr. Van Scoyac?
John Van Scoyac from Precinct 13. And I'm just requesting some further clarification because it's now been positioned as a choice between this resolution and measures on Welland and a plan that's already before the Transportation Board and the Transportation Department to fund some traffic calming on Stedman. And we have not heard from any town meeting members who represent the precinct in which Stedman is located, and I'd love to get some sense of whether how that would go down, in that precinct. It feels like a very incomplete discussion at this point.
Mr. Golden, are you?
Jack Golden, town meeting member, Precinct 8. I can only say, and I think it's the most powerful picture, if one tries to, as one leaves their home on Stedman Street during the mornings in particular, which I do on several mornings, there are many, many, many cars and many, many, many children, and it is difficult to go up the street. You must be very, very careful. That is the most profound impact that I have of living on the street and then trying to leave the street. I think anything that the traffic department can do to alleviate the stresses on the street would be welcome.
Ms. LaPlante?
Virginia LaPlante, town meeting member, Precinct 6. I think it's disingenuous to pit one street in Brookline against another. I'm outraged. Nobody ever said not to do Stedman Street. That just came up for the first time tonight, and I think it's by opponents probably. Nor do we expect that this necessarily has to be done by September. This is a resolution. We've waited 10 years. We had to put a date on it. We would love to have it by the end of the summer. If it turns out practically and technically, engineeringly, it can't be done, that's fine. It's just a resolution. Let them do it as soon as they can. But I think it's important morally to pass this resolution, to tell the neighborhood that it's going to happen. Please pass it. Thank you.
Ms. Stone?
Rebecca Stone, town meeting member from Precinct 3 and school committee member. Just to clarify,
Even though I don't represent the Stedman Street project in any way, it is in some ways also pitting two schools against each other. The Welland Street project stems from traffic calming around the high school. The Stedman Street project was brought on behalf of parents, mostly of devotion school children. The devotion school serves 750 of our children every day, and many of them cross a very, very busy intersection at Stedman Street and Gibbs. And that is the reason for the traffic calming there. It's a very dangerous intersection, and a lot of our elementary school students every day, twice a day, cross that intersection. That was the reason that that project was moved forward, was primarily for the devotion school.
Thank you. I think it's now time to move to we will consider first the Selectmen and Advisory Committee's motion to refer the subject matter of this resolution to the Transportation Board. Those in favor, please raise your hands. Those opposed? Those in favor, please raise your hands again. Okay, the chair is in doubt, and we'll have a counted standing vote. Before we embark on this, I need to swear in 3 more tellers. Mr. Olens, would you please rise? Mr. Berger, you willing to act as a teller? And Mr. Farlow, if you promise to be a little more expeditious. You're on trial, Mr. Farlow. Please raise your right hands. Do you swear that you will faithfully and impartially perform the duties of tellers of town meeting? Say I do, please. Thank you, thank you. All those in favor, please, of the motion to refer, please stand and remain standing until the count of your section of the auditorium has been announced. You should be standing if you favor the motion to refer of the Board of Selectmen and the Advisory Committee. Dr. Kuchar?
32 in the center.
32 in the center. You may be seated in the center. May we have quiet, please, Mr. Owens?
36, Mr. Moderator.
36 on the right. You may be seated on the right and at the Board of Selectmen's table. Mr. Bassett? 34 on my left. You may be seated on my left. Now, those who are opposed to the motion to refer, please stand and remain standing until you've been counted. Mr. Owens?
18, Mr. Moderator.
18 on my right. Dr. Kuchar? 46 in the center. Mr. Bassett? 58. On my left. Motion fails by a vote of 122 to 102. On the resolution on the blue sheets, those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. Those in favor, please raise your hands. Those opposed, please raise your hands. The motion carries. We proceed to, at long last, to item 40. Can we have quiet, please? $256,000 for the rehabilitation of sidewalks. Item 41, $60,000 for the purchase of multi-space parking meters. Item 42, $120,000. Yes, Mr. Bassett.
On the parking meters, I understand that we are changing our parking meters. I'd like a little bit of an explanation what we're going to be getting. And I wonder also if we're maintaining existing parking meters. I understand that the machine that's been in the police station is not working, is not being fixed because we are changing. Are we costing ourselves money? My understanding is that parking meters account for, well, it used to be a couple $1 million a year in revenue, so it's an important source of revenue. Are we maintaining all our meters completely until the change is made? What is the change going to be? And also some explanation. My understanding is that the DPW is responsible for maintenance of the meters and the police department is responsible, I think, for collections. So some explanation of the dual responsibility for the meters might be appropriate
But
too.
let's see if we can answer all of your questions, Mr. Corain. And please stay at the microphone in case we miss one or two.
Sure. I'll go down the list of the questions. This $60,000 is to purchase 2 multi-space meters. The town has had a committee put together by, I believe, the Board of Selectmen, including town staff, transportation board members, and other individuals looking at new meter technology to bring it into the town. It has been in the CIP, I believe, for a couple years now and has been pushed back. Last year, we decided that we wanted to run a trial program to analyze the effectiveness of these multi-space meters that are used in thousands of communities across the U.S., including Cambridge and the city of Boston locally, as well as Manchester, New Hampshire, Rhode Island. We're sort of late to the game.
Excuse me, Mr. Crowe, are these the ones where you go, you put in your paper money
yep.
and they give you a piece of paper you put in your dashboard or something like
Correct.
that?
What these are, we went through a whole RFP process. We called in the different vendors to judge their technology. What we decided to do is what's called pay and display meters. These are 2 meters are placed in a parking lot to replace anywhere from as low as 40 meters in the Kenton Webster to, I believe, 92 meters in the Babcock Street lot. And what these do is you go to the meter, it takes cash, it takes coin, and it takes credit card as well as the park card machine, so the users have a lot more choices to pay for their parking. It also does the overnight parking right directly in the lot instead of having to go to the police station each time for your guest overnight space. You pay for your parking, you decide how long you want, you get a slip and you put it on your dashboard.
Okay, Mr. Corain, maybe we could proceed to the next question.
I thought that was very responsive.
The next question, in terms of meter maintenance, we are the DPW Highways Division. Their employees maintain all meters. The Police Department Traffic Division collects the revenue from the meters. We are maintaining all our meters throughout this entire process. This is a pilot program. The $60,000 is to finish the pilot and install the second machines in the 2 lots.
Next question.
I guess the other question was about maintenance. I hope that we're maintaining the old meters so that we're not losing revenue as we make the change.
Yep, we are continuing 100% maintenance of the meters that are out in the system as well.
Thank you, Mr. Friedman.
Thank you very much.
Frank Friedman, Precinct 8. Mr. Moderator, I don't know if this is the proper place to ask this question, but I hope it is. It pertains to the placement of the multi-space meters. The one on Babcock Street in Coolidge Corner is about 1.5 feet away from the sidewalk. When it's raining, it's impossible to get to that multi-pay device without stepping into a very large muddy puddle. And I'm wondering if that's going to be addressed in this budget item, or if that's going to be addressed from your department.
Mr. Crane?
It will be addressed in the $60,000. Our initial purchase of the two were out of operating funds. We were limited in what we had available to purchase the two machines and install them. The $60,000 covers the two new machines to finish out the pilot of 2 per lot, as well as concrete pours to take care of that situation.
Well, will you keep them out of mud puddles?
What is it? I'm sorry.
Will you keep them out of mud puddles?
Yes, the concrete. We're going to be pouring concrete pads.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Gates?
I was just wondering, does it have any effect on those people who have handicap placards?
Tell us who you are, ma'am.
Stell Cates, Precinct 7.
Nope. Under state law, you are exempt from paying meters, even if they're paying display. You can park for free as long as you have your handicap placard displayed.
But you don't have to have any kind of a card or anything to insert in the machine?
No. As long as you have your handicap placard displayed.
Thank you, sir. You can stand down. Item 42, $120,000 for the rehabilitation of town-owned parking lots. Mr. Davis, do you have a question?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. When I take a look at the CIP...
Yeah, let's tell us who you are.
Yes, thank you. Jonathan Davis, Town Meeting, Precinct 10. Mr. Moderator, when I take a look at page 26 of the CIP booklet, the Capital Improvements Program booklet, the pink one, under item 31, it explains that apparently for all of these parking lots, there is going to be a removal of the pavement and repaving. And my question is, in this time of budget constraint, what happens if, in terms of potential future costs to do all of this, if we were to delay for a couple of years until the budget situation perhaps stabilizes for the better? What is lost by delaying this?
Yes, Mr. Ditto. Before you speak, rather than refer to the CIP, Mr. Davis, I'd appreciate your reading the enlarged description of this item, for instance, on page 8-48. Unfortunately, it's not numbered the same. It's numbered 9. So when we reach the other items about which you have a question, you will have perhaps looked at these expanded descriptions. Mr. Ditto?
Peter Ditto, Director of Engineering and Transportation. These parking lots have been long overdue for maintenance. They've been in the CIP working their way forward, so they are desperately in need of repair, and I would hate to have to defer them at this point in time.
Thank you. Item 43, $260,000 for the renovation of playground equipment, fields, and fencing. Dr. Friedman?
Paula Friedman, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 14. Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Point of information and clarification, please. In referring to the description on 848, number 10, regarding this item, I don't see any mention of noise mitigation. Last fall, Town Meeting passed an article put forward by the Noise Bylaw Committee that said whenever a playground or recreational space is created or renovated, noise mitigation would be taken into consideration. Could we please clarify whether that is included?
Ms. Schutt-Galantine.
Erin Chute-Galentine, Director of Parks and Open Space. We consider noise mitigation when we have a full renovation of a park or playground. So, for example, with the upcoming Fisher Hill Reservoir, we have a line item for improvements to that park when we move forward to construct that, and we'll be looking at noise mitigation at that time. So this is an annual appropriation to look at structural improvements like fence repairs, infield repairs, safety surfacing, play component parts. When we do a major renovation, that's where with our design professionals, we look at noise mitigation amongst a whole host of other things.
So you would, if I may, you would consider this for minor renovations, this particular allocation?
That's right.
Thank you.
Thank you. Item 44, $120,000 for the rehabilitation of town and school grounds. 45, $150,000 for the removal and replacement of trees. Item 46, $25,000 for school furniture upgrades. 47, $50,000 for the removal of asbestos from town and school buildings.
Mr.
Item
Moderator.
40, yes, Mr. Farlow.
Frank Farlow, Precinct 4. Mr. Moderator, it's been several years since we had a summary given to us of the approximate amount that we have been spending in recent years annually on this, on asbestos removal, and very roughly what we can anticipate in the future. How close to the end of this job are we?
Mr. DeMaio? I'm sorry? Is building commissioner here?
Charlie Simmons, Director of Buildings. The $50,000 has been allotted for quite a number of years, and what I do is I use that money when I find asbestos in those areas that are not really foreseeable, like under carpeting or a broken pipe in a wall. We open the wall and we find that the pipe is wrapped with asbestos.
Mr. Simmons, the question was, how close are you to completing the overall project of removing asbestos from town and school buildings? How much more are we likely to have to appropriate to complete the job? I believe that was your question, wasn't it?
Most town and school buildings still contain quite a lot of asbestos, so I see this going on for quite a number of years. We don't remove the asbestos unless there's a problem, or we're removing, say, carpeting. So I foresee this going on for at least another 10 years.
Thank you. You have another question, Mr. Farlow?
The other one was, how much have we actually been spending from year to year in recent years?
Do you know how much we've put into this over the last 10 years, sir?
$50,000 per year for the last 10 years.
Thank you. Mr. Friedman?
Harry Friedman, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 14. When we redo a building, like we just redid Town Hall or the Health Center, is there any asbestos left in those buildings, or is this going to be something that keeps on going on forever?
No, we remove it all.
Thank you.
Thank you. You can stand down, sir.
Thank
you. Item 48, $50,000 for ADA renovations to town and school buildings. 49, $100,000 for improvements to life safety systems and building security in town and school buildings. Item 50, $105,572 for energy conservation projects in town and school buildings. Item 51, $100,000 for upgrades to energy management systems. 52, $625,000 for roof repairs and replacements in town and school facilities. Item 53, and in some of these items there are appropriations and transfers from existing accounts. I'm not unused balances from former capital appropriations. I'm not reading those, but you can read them within the items themselves. Item 53, $75,000 for engineering or architectural services for plans and specs at the Pierce School. Item 54. Yes, Ms. Carroll?
Carol, Precinct 8. I have a couple of questions on this item.
On what?
On the item 54, on the $400,000.
Well, we aren't, we're now there. Item 54, $400,000 for the expansion of classroom capacity in various schools.
Okay,
Ms. Carroll?
I'm still Carol from Precinct 8.
You are?
Yes, I haven't changed. I have a couple of questions. In the full write-up, which I believe is on page 51 and 52, there's a mention of the appropriation that was made in 2007, or maybe it was fiscal 2008, of $400,000. And it was to be expended on modular classrooms, and because of a faulty bid situation, that wasn't done, and we used the money differently. It said all the money was not expended, but it doesn't detail how much was left over. And then we're asking for another $400,000. It seems to me there should be some description of a plan of what they're going to do with that money, not just a sentence saying it's for classroom capacity. So I was wondering if someone from the schools could explain.
Dr.
what they're
Lupini?
gonna do.
Bill Lupini, Superintendent of Schools. I'm going to ask Peter Rowe, our Deputy Superintendent, to address the first part of the question.
And you'll find the expanded explanation, Ms. Carroll, at the top of page 8-52, which may answer some of your questions.
The original appropriation of $400,000, most of it is still budgeted. The director of town buildings, Charlie Simmons, used some of it when we renovated the Runkle School multi-purpose room into 2 classrooms, but the lion's share of it is, I think, $375,000 of that $400,000 is still available. The additional $400,000 is going to be added to that original appropriation so that we have some flexibility going forward.
Yeah, as we talked about here a couple of years now, flexibility that we'll need. We will. There's no doubt now that we will have portables in place at a number of locations next year. What Peter and others are involved in doing now is assessing where it's possible for us to put portables. We're taking a look at that against what our enrollment needs are at particular locations, and then trying to develop a plan, which we'll have in the next few months.
Thank you. Item 55.
Mr. Moderator?
Oh, yes, Mr. Burstein.
Michael Burstein, now of Precinct 12. I've found a slight discrepancy in item number 50. I just wanted to address on page 8-61. It says the money for energy conservation is $105,572, but back on page 8-50, it says $100,572. So either there's $5,000 that we are spending or we aren't.
Which is the, I'm sorry? It's 105 is the correct number.
Thank you.
Nice to see you're so alert, Mr. Burstein. Item 55, $3,280,000 for costs and settlement of claims associated with the Newton Street landfill.
Mr. Moderator?
Yes, Mr.
Absidegi, Precinct 15. Could you tell us if this is the total cost and how many properties were involved?
Ms. Kaplan?
Yes, my name is Nancy Kaplan. I'm Special Environmental Counsel for the town, working with the Town Council's office. And yes, this is the total amount for the settlement for the remaining 12 properties that are affected by this situation.
Thank you.
Thank you. Item 56, $4,275,000 for assessment and corrective action associated with the Newton Street landfill. This is a borrowing, and it requires a 2/3 vote. So on that appropriation, those in favor, please raise your hands. Those opposed? The vote is 205 to 1. Carries by a 2/3 vote. Item 57, $1,200,000 for remodeling, renovating, reconstruction, making extraordinary repairs to the garages located on the grounds of the Town Hall complex, including but not limited to areas below the main library and the Town Hall. And this is also a borrowing resolution and will require a two-thirds vote. Mr. Davis?
Jonathan Davis, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 10. Mr. Moderator, I believe that this is also, this also has to do with the driveway between the Town Hall and the main library. The discussion, the expanded discussion is on page 8-53 of the combined reports. The problem with that expanded discussion, Mr. Moderator, I believe, is that it doesn't show a breakdown between the two parts of this, the two parts of this project. So for that, unfortunately, I have to go back to the CIP, which on page 15 of the CIP says that $750,000 is supposed to be for the work having to do with the leak, and $450,000 is supposed to involve the driveway work. And the driveway work is explained again on page 15 of the CIP as to eliminate a hazard to pedestrians who are crossing the driveway. Mr. Moderator, I have an initial question and then a comment and then possibly a motion, and I apologize for taking up this much time. My first question, my question, and perhaps someone can answer this, is what is the record of pedestrian accidents at this intersection where the path, the sidewalk, crosses the driveway that comes up from the garage?
You know the answer to that, Mr. Ditto? Does anyone in the back have information about the frequency of accidents right across the street from the police station on Washington? Chief O'Leary says he doesn't have that information either, so you've...
Mr. Moderator, may I be permitted to assume that the number of accidents in living memory is de minimis?
You can assume whatever you want, Mr. Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
We certainly don't have any facts for you.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Now, I actually went over this morning to the offending driveway and
you survived.
Sidewalk. Beg pardon?
You survived.
Well, I guess I did. But I noticed something really interesting to me. There is a stop sign down at the entryway into the garage for exiting cars. There is no stop sign up at the top of the driveway where the driveway crosses the sidewalk. There's no signage, including the little boingy types of signs that we see in crosswalks. There's no signage that would warn a pedestrian that this is an active driveway and they should look right and look left. And I'm wondering, Mr. Moderator, given the CIP on page 15, which is proposing to devote $450,000 to the driveway work, whether an expenditure of maybe a few $1,000s on signage might be a better expenditure of town revenues. And so, Mr. Moderator, I would like to move that...
Well, why don't we get an answer to your question, whether that signage will be part of the project. Mr. Ditto? Perhaps that will foreclose your motion.
First of all, that $450,000 won't be...
Into the microphone, Mr. Ditto.
That $450,000 won't be spent this year, as the estimate for the structural work on the garage ceiling is exceeded the funding. So in your answer to signage, we can look at that. There is a very confusing intersection and a very, very busy intersection, so what signage we put up has to be clear and concise.
Mr. Moderator, I must say that I don't fully follow the Mr. Ditto here. What is the expenditure going to be, Mr. Moderator, with respect to the driveway work?
Mr. Cronin?
Sean Cronin, Deputy Town Administrator. When the CIP book was published, the estimate for the entire project was $1.2 million, as you see in the book. Since then, the Building Commission has received estimates for the overall garage work for the 3 complexes, and that ranges from $2.5 to $3+ million. So there was a memo that went from the Building Commissioner to the Advisory Committee and the Board of Selectmen notifying them of this. So this $1.2 million will go solely for the structural work that's needed for the garages. Next year, you will see another request for funding to complete that project, and between now and then, I think we can have some conversation about the $450,000 estimate for the driveway portion of the project.
So this entire $1.2 million is for structural work associated with a far larger project?
That's correct.
And Mr. Moderator, am I correct in understanding that no significant portion of the $1.2 million will be spent on the driveway?
That's what you've just heard, Mr. Davis.
None of it will.
None of it.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Yes, sir.
Stephen Feinstein, Precinct 8. My question is about, just prior to last town meeting, we all received the very good news that the multi-million-dollar town hall renovation had come in under budget, and that the surplus $700,000 would be available for other needs. Then we received the news that the selectmen had decided that rather than reallocate the $700,000 surplus to one of the many critical needs the town faces, they decided to spend it on brand new furniture for town hall that was never contemplated in the original proposal for the renovation nor discussed at town meeting. So I asked about that at the last town meeting, and I was given the answer, we all received the answer from Selectman Daley, that in fact the $700,000 would not be spent entirely on brand new furniture, but would be reallocated to exactly this budget item, this special appropriation to renovate the town hall garage. You might remember she spoke about how the garage was more often a swimming pool than actually a place to park cars. Well, my question is then, if the $700,000 was spent on this item, why is the $1.2 million that we're discussing today the same number that's been in the long-term CIP for many years? Why isn't it reduced by $700,000? Follow-up question.
What
happened to the $700,000? That's my question.
Mr. Cronin?
Two-part answer to the question. The second part first. If you go back to the item number 52 for the roofs, there's $500,000 reappropriated from the town hall project. So when Chairman Daley spoke last year about the funding for furnishing town hall, this $500 is above and beyond that. So there was a larger savings in the project than it originally anticipated. So that $500 is being plowed back into this project. When Chairman Daley spoke last year, the original intention was to use it for this project, the $1.2 million, but because we wouldn't want to borrow an amount of only $600,000 to $700,000, we moved that money over to this roof project where we're not borrowing any money. So it was simply a matter of financing.
Well, was $700,000 spent on furniture then?
Not $700.
How much?
What's the number? Around $500.
Okay, well, I would urge town meeting to reject this special appropriation unless we receive some guarantees from you that if there is a surplus from this line item, it won't be spent on unnecessary extravagances.
Well, I think you've heard, Mr. Feinstein, that this is only $1.2 million of a $2 or $3 million project. So,
but if $500,000 was spent on something that town meeting never had a chance to deliberate on, we need guarantees that they won't do that again.
It's not entirely clear to me what kind of guarantee you're asking.
A no vote is what I'm asking for.
Oh, okay. If you agree with Mr. Feinstein's reasoning, you will vote against this item. It requires a two-thirds vote. Ms. LaPlante?
Virginia LaPlante, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 6. If this money is now not going to the driveways, as we've just been told, shouldn't that be stricken from the vote so there's no mistake?
I don't see anything in the vote about a driveway.
Including but not limited to the driveway areas between the main library and Town Hall. I think that should be stricken.
Okay, that's a motion to amend, and the Board of Selectmen and Mr. Cronin say that that's an appropriate amendment, so we will first vote on the amendment, which requires only a majority vote. It's moved by Ms. LaPlante to delete the words at the bottom of page 8-61, including but not limited to the driveway areas at the top of page 8-62 between the main library and the town hall. Is there a second to that motion? All those in favor, please raise your hands. Those opposed, motion carries. On the motion,
Mr. Moderator?
Yes, sir.
May I speak for just a moment? Jonathan Margolis from Precinct 7 and a member of the Board of Trustees of the library. Boy, that's a first. John Margolis, Precinct 7, and a member of the Board of Trustees of the library. I realize that there's some justifiable displeasure with apparent confusion in the budgeting for this item, but let me suggest that it would be a good idea if the garage between the library and the town hall does not collapse, whether on cars or not. This is a necessary item, and I suggest that it should be passed.
Thank you. On the appropriation under item 57 as amended, those in favor, please raise your hands. Those opposed? Motion carries 208-1. Item 14 on page 8-62, free cash. Appropriate and transfer $7,053,295 from free cash for the following purposes, A, B, and C. Mr. Davis?
Jonathan Davis, Precinct 10. I wonder in this context whether it would be possible to have somebody explain why some of this free cash is not being diverted into the stabilization fund, which, as I understand it, could be used in a following year in case revenues fall short, as we've heard from both our advisory committee and by the Board of Selectmen that revenues are expected to decrease. So if somebody could please explain why there is no distribution of at least a portion of this free cash into the stabilization fund.
Ms. Daly?
The stabilization fund is fully funded at the current time at $5 million. We're not tapping into it this year. We're saving it for next year and the year after. This money, if you try to reduce this amount, this is the money that goes toward the CIP projects. So it would throw off the CIP if you made adjustments to it. But we don't feel that the stabilization fund needs more at this time.
Mr. Moderator, as I understand it, a portion of this free cash is actually being used to reduce the tax rate. And I know that this is a hard time given that there's been an override vote, but I still wonder why some of that money that's otherwise being diverted to reduce the tax rate cannot go into the stabilization fund. The idea, as I understand it, the idea of how much gets funded in the stabilization fund is purely a Board of Selectmen policy. It's not, as I understand it, a state policy.
Mr. Kelleher.
Rich Kelleher, Town Administrator. The language to reduce the tax levy is DOR language. The reality is that the town fully anticipates to tax the property tax to its full levy capacity under Prop 2.5 and beyond. So there's not a reduction in the levy taking place per se. These are dollars being appropriated for CIP purposes, which otherwise would have to be raised on the levy if property tax revenue were going to be used instead of the free cash that's available for this purpose.
Thank you, Mr. Kelleher. Mr. Ross?
Mr. Kelleher just answered my question. Thank you.
Sir. Okay, we now proceed to on page 8-63, to the departmental expenditures. And I'm going to go through each budget, and as I reach a budget, if you have a question for the department head in charge of that budget, which question need not be a budgetary question, come to the microphone and I'll recognize you and you can ask it. This is an annual turkey shoot. The selectmen, $600,160. Human resources, $512,008. Mr. Wyszynski?
Next one.
Information technology, $1,421,058. Mr. Wyszynski.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Mr. Stokes, would you come forward?
Neil Wyszynski, Precinct 5. The Information Technology Department has been undertaking 2 wireless projects, one called DAS and the other is the Wi-Fi, and I'm curious as to the status and how they're going.
Mr. Stokes?
I'm Kevin Stokes, Chief Information Officer. In terms of the 2 projects Mr. Wyszynski was just mentioning, Brookline is pleased to have 2 distributed antenna systems functioning in the town currently. First one by a company called NextG Networks, offers service by a carrier called Metro PCS that operates completely town-wide. And within the South Brookline area, there is a provider referred to as Extenet who has currently service available from T-Mobile and Sprint. They are also in negotiations with a 3rd carrier, and hopefully by the end of the summer we'll have that 3rd carrier online in South Brookline. For further benefit for the town should expect approximately $50,000 in revenue from the licensing and fees associated with these 2 carriers over the next year. In terms of the Wi-Fi network is continuing to be leveraged here within the town. Our public safety folks are making good use of it, particularly with the cruisers and the fire department apparatus now able to have access to better and more robust information at their fingertips. Galaxy, the company that's providing the network, is pleased with the consistent growth of the subscriber base, and they're also looking at expanding their base here locally with a couple of neighboring communities that are also investigating the technology.
Thank you, sir. Finance Department, $3 million.
Moderator?
Yes.
I have an IT
Mr.
question.
Vitolo?
Tommy Vitolo, Precinct 1. Mr. Moderator, when I'm at meetings working for the town in any one of a number of committees and any one of a number of rooms in the town, I pull out my laptop and I'd love to use wireless to research some information on the fly, and I find that I don't get any signal inside any of the rooms. And I'm wondering if we have any plans on allowing free Wi-Fi within our own buildings in public meeting rooms, precisely so that people volunteering their time for the town can be more productive and effective.
Mr. Stokes?
Yes, in my conversations with Galaxy Internet, Galaxy has been gracious enough to wire or unwire our conference rooms within the town hall to offer basically a hot zone. We expect to have that online sometime during the summer.
Thank you.
There are other rooms as well. Is there plans for anything within, for example, the public safety conference room, the library conference rooms, or any other rooms within town that are commonly used for public work?
I think from a technical standpoint, absolutely, the possibility of extending it is there. We haven't talked to Galaxy specifically about those rooms, but that would be certainly something we'd explore.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Finance Department, $3,049,791. Legal Services, $748,648.
Mr. Moderator?
Yes.
I have a question. I'm Ruth Ann Snyder, Precinct 6. And I have a question. I'd like to know how much money has been spent to date on legal fees related to the May 24th incident at Town Hall.
Mr.
I
Pazzo?
have a follow-up question.
Jennifer DePazzo, Town Council, $47,490.
Your next question, Ms. Snyder?
Can you project for us what you think the final cost of this legal matter is going to be?
No.
Thank you. Mr. Farlow?
Mr. Moderator, Frank Farlow, Precinct 4. I wonder if you could ask Town Council for a very rough estimate of the number of person-hours in the departments that have been devoted.
Yeah, I can't either.
Sorry.
Into the mic, Mr. Farlow.
The
You've
number
been there
of,
before.
The number of person-hours that have been devoted by Town Council's office to the subject of surveillance cameras in town.
Can you answer that, Ms. DePazzo? Roughly?
I can only estimate that that was assigned to Associate Town Council Patricia Correa, who will be here when that's taken up. And I would estimate that to be at least 30 to 40 hours of her time.
And does that include the public meetings that she has attended?
That would.
Okay.
That would. And it's continuing, too, because of the committee that's been established.
Thank
it's
you.
ongoing.
Mr. Conquest?
Arthur Conquest, Precinct 6. Would we be able to get, would be able to get a breakdown of what the legal costs are for the May 24th, 2007 incident? In other words, have it broken down by what monies are spent for what items?
Well, Mr. Conquest,
Yes.
I think you may be treading on privileged grounds. But, Ms. DePazzo?
It doesn't have to be tonight. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. It doesn't have to be this evening.
Well, I understand that, but...
Okay. Okay.
Jennifer DePazzo, Town Council. Without providing any privileged or attorney work product, we certainly can provide copies of the invoices that we've received from the several different firms that represent all three defendants.
Okay, thank
so
you.
I suggest you contact Ms. DePazzo for this information. To the extent that she can do it, she'll give it to you. Advisory Committee, $19,615. Town Clerk, $480,094. Planning and Community Development, $627,081. Police, $14,381,212. Fire, $12,206,045. Building Department, $6,982,354. Mr. Vitolo?
Tommy Vitolo, Precinct 1. Mr. Moderator, I was hoping for a very brief update on how the green cleaning resolution that passed unanimously is faring with respect to the building department operation and budgets, and perhaps even from the schools, although I know that might be pushing my luck.
That's pushing your luck. Mr. Shepard or Mr. Simmons? To the extent that you can address the situation with the school building, do so, please.
Yes, sir, I will. I'll try. Mike Shepard, Building Commissioner. As Mr. Vitello probably knows, we had anticipated going green with our cleaning products before the resolution. I'm happy to report that I suspect we will be fully converted over by the end of this fiscal year. I understand from talking to Mr. Rowe at the school department that they have already completed their conversion to green cleaning products. I can't report on the budgetary considerations at this point, but I suspect they're not insurmountable. That's about it, sir.
Thank you. Public Works, $12,879,990. Dr. Safer.
Josh Safer, Precinct 16. Hopefully this is where I can ask my question.
You can try.
The question is very simply... Can you hear me now? All right. So my question is very simply that at town meeting in November, we voted that the selectmen should come up with a unified way to enforce sidewalk snow removal that would not be complaint driven, and I'm simply wondering what the status of that is.
Mr. DeMaio.
Prior to the winter, we went into the winter with a complete report from the Snow Committee on Sidewalks, if you recall, Mr. Safer. And as a result of that, we had several meetings with health, police, public works, and the building department, who are all involved in handing out these citations and warnings, and also sent out quite a bit of educational type literature to all the residents in the Public Works newsletter that goes out twice a year. So that being said, I think that we had an extremely successful year relative to sidewalk enforcement. We did have quite a bit of snow this year. We had 78 inches of snow. Our normal is about 42 inches. And actually the complaints were down. Police department was responding on a complaint-only basis. This year they did monitoring and issued citations and warnings according to what they saw, the same as other departments, which I think made a tremendous difference.
Thank you, Ms. Senator.
Susan, Senator, Precinct 5. I have a question about the budget for the Bike Advisory Committee. What percentage of this transportation budget is going towards the safety of bike riding in the community? Not counting the parade.
I can't give you an exact percentage. I know that a lot of that is governed by the Transportation Board, and as a result of that, it's an issue on the front of the radar screen. But I could get you the percentage for tomorrow if that would be satisfactory.
That would be great, thanks.
Thank you.
I have a question here.
Yes, Mr. O'Neill.
Donald O'Neill, town meeting member, Precinct 4. I just have a question on the street rehab money. I wanted to know how much of that money is going to be outsourced and how many of it's going to be in-house.
In what capacity? What outsourcing?
Just for example, the sidewalks. How many sidewalks is the town going to do, and how many sidewalks are you going to contract out? I don't think so.
Relative to snow or relative to construction?
Relative to construction, sir.
Construction, we hold about $200,000 in our capital budget for outsourcing. The rest within the operating budget is all done in-house.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Spiegel.
Diana Spiegel, Precinct 2. Mr. Moderator, I missed asking a question regarding the police budget, and I wonder if I can ask it now.
Sure. Go ahead.
It's my understanding that a sector involving a large North Brookline area has had special police patrol on weekend evenings that's been paid for out of grants which are going to expire. And I wanted to know if those grants can be extended, and if not, is there money available for continuing the special patrol car, which has been very helpful in terms of keeping down party noise?
Chief O'Leary.
Good evening, Daniel O'Leary, Chief of Police. That special car that went around North Brookline was funded under a grant from the state on an underage drinking grant. We did exhaust it, I think, 2 weeks ago. We are carrying the patrols through at least until the beginning of June because we wanted to wait till the college students get out. I know there is a neighborhood meeting next Monday night, and we're going to talk about reassessing and maybe knocking it off for the summer and resuming it in September when the college students come back.
Thank you, Mr. Ross.
Yes, going back to Public Works, I notice at the Washington Square T-stop, there's this row of newspaper vending machines of various sorts, and there's this beautiful multi-bin newspaper vending, I don't know, array, I guess you'd call it, that's completely, that seems to have been put in as part of the renovation, and it's completely unused, and it's getting defaced, and I wonder if we could be told what's going on with that.
Mr. DeMaio?
Yes, the newspaper boxes you mentioned were put in as part of the Beacon Street construction. We've got about what I'd call 8-unit type boxes there. They were put in about 12 months ago, and we're in the process of trying to develop a program over the summer where we can, first of all, meet with all the vending companies, the major newspaper companies, get them to agree to use those boxes and set up a time frame in which they'll convert over.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rosenthal.
Thank you, Marty Rosenthal, still Precinct 9. I also wanted to ask about two other parts of the resolve clause of the November resolution on sidewalk snow removal and whether they've yet been implemented or are they waiting for next winter. And those were the one that talked about a credible, well-publicized, fair, and readily available fee-based program or pool of seasonal employees for people who need help clearing their sidewalks. That was one, and should I hold off on the other one, or should I ask that one at the same time, Mr. Moderator?
Mr. DeMaio?
Getting help for people that need help is the bottom line. Help clearing their sidewalks, elderly people, et cetera.
I believe the count for last year is we had some, that program is run through Recreation, and we had some 67 requests for assistance last year, and we had about 45 young students signed up for the program. What happens is when you make a request, you're given the number of the young person that's in your neighborhood willing to do that. You call them directly, and they establish a price for shoveling your walk or your driveway.
May I ask, Mr. Moderator, if that improved last year? In the past, it's been a program that's had problems.
It hasn't changed that much. I think what's changed is we did get more volunteers to do that this year than we had in previous years.
Right, and may I ask about the other part of the resolution?
Go ahead.
To prioritize townwide enforcement by cruising police officers. In the past, there have been different parts of town assigned to police and different to health, et cetera, and this resolution asked that police officers cruising townwide do more enforcement.
Mr. O'Leary? Chief O'Leary?
Yes, we did pick up enforcement this time. I think we issued, top of my head, I think 108 citations between warning and complaints for violations of the sidewalk. We did do more townwide enforcement. We also answered the calls when plows were leaving snow onto the street. So it has been picked up this past year.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Weitzman.
Thank you. Don Weitzman, Precinct 12. Mr. Moderator, one of the positive things I think that has come out of the debate on pay-as-you-throw on the TMMA email exchanges has been a focus on the problems of dumping and other problems perhaps related to some students in the North Brookline areas. My question for DPW or other departments is whether the town has been or is being proactive in trying to work with BU or other colleges or with the students directly in setting up programs, perhaps amnesty days on moving days for getting rid of things like the infamous couch that was on the front page of the tab. But in any case, are there any programs in the works to be proactive about this and to work on the problems of good citizenship in North Brookline?
Mr. DeMaio?
The question again, is this relative to
trash pickup.
Hazardous Waste Day?
Not just Hazardous Waste Day, but large bulky items that are left by students on moving day or other violations of trash disposal.
As we all know, the violations pick up when the students start to move.
Well, the question, Mr. DeMaio, is whether there's any outreach effort by the DPW or the town to colleges or the students to prevent or short-circuit this problem?
Yes, or by the Board of Selectmen, for instance, yes.
There's been no change.
The answer
they
is
put it
no.
out there, we take it.
Okay, thank you very much. Hope there will be.
Ms. Kaplan?
Hi, Ruth Kaplan, Precinct 13. I had a snow removal question. I noticed last winter, I know this was true at the Beaconsfield T-stop, that when there was a lot of snow, you literally couldn't climb up the little mountains around the parking meters to feed the meters. And I just, thank you. So what concerns me about that is a reasonable person wouldn't even try because it really was hazardous. So I just wondered, if you, first of all, we relax the parking meter rules when you can't, climb up those little mountains, or whether what we can do something better to address that. I was very concerned thinking about elderly people trying to feed those meters.
Mr. DeMaio?
These are the snow drifts, I imagine you're speaking, on the side of the road to block the parking meters?
Well, no, this is actually, I'm thinking about Beaconsfield T-stop in particular. That's the one I'm familiar with. You really couldn't climb up and feed the meter. It's probably true in other parts of town.
We do plow those. We do occupy spaces with the snow if there's no other place to put it. But actually, it's there. We try to remove snow on a needed basis in some of those areas to gain the spaces back. But actually, to go in there, the T is responsible for access onto the ramps and whatnot to the T stations.
Well, I don't know if you know the answer to this question, but do you or somebody know whether we actually ticket people who can't pay those
Chief O'Leary?
pay under those circumstances?
Do your meter maids take into account accessibility to the meters?
Yes, they do. There are days when there's a lot of snow that we tell them not to tag the meters, and I think a lot of it's up to their discretion. I think this year when they had the availability of tag 2-hour parking, we kind of changed their focus and shifted them to 2-hour on-street violations. So our meter maids are aware that people cannot get to meters in certain locations, and then I know that the DPW does come in and clean out a lot of areas as the weather gets a little bit better.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear that. I would suggest that maybe if there could be a way of actually communicating to particularly older people in town that there's sort of this reasonableness rule. I'm just concerned about people actually trying and falling as a result. So,
thank you, Mr. Kane.
Could I ask one more question? It has nothing
Sure.
to do with. It's just going back to it's the town clerk's budget. I was just wondering if there is any way that we can reduce the amount of mail we get through the regular mails as opposed to through email. It just seems like that would be I know it, as a high school parent, we no longer receive report cards in the mail to save money from the high school budget. So I was wondering, as a town, it just seems like we get a lot of individual pieces of mail that either could be consolidated or maybe sent through email, and whether there's some legal barrier to that.
Would the town clerk like to address that question?
No offense.
Thank you, Ruth. It's a question that's been asked a number of times, and I would turn to the good state representative for the town of Brookline, because if you have those kinds of concerns, because I would say virtually 95% of all the mail that you receive is mandated by state statute. It can only be changed if the statutes are amended.
Well, is that something
and
that...
much of what you receive, I'm just
They're legal
a
notices,
good guess
I know.
for legal notices.
Right.
They're required under Chapter 40A.
Right.
To be sent to the abutters. Now, also, the bylaw requires to be sent to all town meeting members. And if you remember, probably about 3 or 4 years ago, maybe a little bit longer, that was increased. So it's not just the affected precinct, but it's the precincts that are abutting to that precinct. So at a minimum, at least 5 town meeting precincts will be notified.
Well, do you know whether a town meeting member could request to get things by email, could say that I'd rather
Well,
get it by
it is, all the notices are posted on the calendar. That's the first thing. So it is on the website already. But again, you've incorporated into the zoning bylaw, you'd have to amend that.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kane.
Brian Kane, Precinct 6. Mr. Moderator, could you ask the DPW Commissioner, Commissioner DeMayo, to estimate the value of engineering services the town received from Norfolk County in FY09 and estimate the value we might receive in FY10?
Mr. DeMayo?
Mr. Ditto, would you please take care of that?
Over the last 2 years, we received the following services from Norfolk. They did the existing condition survey on South Street. They did the existing condition survey on Harvard Street from School to Webster. And the other one, I think, was on Linden Street. They also gave us existing condition survey. So we've had 3 projects in the last 2 years that they've worked for us.
And Mr. Moderator, is the town happy with the value we're getting in that engineering?
Well, yes.
Might depend on who you ask.
And one follow-up, Mr. Moderator. Could you please just explain to us how that works for the town to request said services from the county?
What happens, we identify a project that we can use their services. There's a form that we fill out, and we forward it to the Norfolk County engineers. They come back, and we finalize the scope of work, and then they give us a start date, and they give us the finished product at some point in the future.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
Chuck Swartz, Precinct 9. I wanted to ask when we can expect something to be done about better timing of traffic lights and pedestrian lights along Beacon Street, particularly in Coolidge Corner, and if anything can be done to initiate a Don't Block the Box program.
Mr. DeMayo?
We're very close. We have an 18-page punch list that we're working through. The traffic signals took the priority in handicap accessibility. We're working with the contractor and the state to finalize the punch list, and as soon as the state and the town of Brookline accept the traffic lights, we can start to adjust the timing. We would hope that we'd be doing that in the next 2 months.
And can anything also be done about trying to improve the traffic flow where it backs up, both on Beacon Street and Harvard Street?
We're hoping that once we get the timing done, we have all these complaints, we've listed them all, we know where the delays are, we know what has to be adjusted, and once we start the time them, it should resolve the issue.
Dr. Safer?
Josh Safer, Precinct 16. And I just want to preface this by a little bit of a thank you to DPW, to the police department, and to residents for improved attention to sidewalk snow removal. That's quite noticeable even in this very bad snow year. My question relates to one last part of that resolution, which was that there be a small allocation of money to cover a pool of seasonal workers that would help out people who might not otherwise be able to clear their own sidewalk snow. And I was wondering how that was addressed.
Mr. DeMayo?
The pool of seasonal workers that we spoke about with the snow committee was a pool that we could draw for actually to operate our equipment. Wasn't actually to shovel for people in need. The shoveling of the people in need come through the recreation department.
Thank you, Mr.
And was that allocation made?
We did not create that pool of money. that we have to go a step further. That could become a union issue. Would want to get the union to agree to that. We did use seasonal employees this year that were on our payroll for running some of the sidewalk tractors when we had exhausted our workforce.
Mr. Van Scoyac?
John Van Scoik, Precinct 13. I apologize that this is a little bit out of order, but Ruth...
You'll know if it is, Mr. Van Scoyac.
Well, I mean, in terms of... I should have asked it earlier. Ruth's question reminded me of something I meant to ask Pat Ward, our town clerk. As a candidate from Precinct 13 who ran with 8 candidates for 5 town meeting seats, I just want to tell you that it was a very vigorous election. And after it was over, I think whether you were a person who won or a person who lost, we were all disappointed at the low turnout in the election, and that was across the town. And I was reminded of the fact that when there is a major snowstorm, we get automated phone calls occasionally from Town Hall saying that there will be a snow emergency in effect the next day. And it just occurred to me, would it be possible for the town clerk on the eve of elections, especially town meeting elections, town elections that are held not in a cycle with other elections where the turnout is traditionally very low, to make one of those pre-recorded phone announcements to all registered voter households in the town to remind people that there is a town election. And maybe have a goal of trying to get participation in our town elections to something that is more respectable than 12 or 16%.
Well, Mr. Van Scoyac, I'm afraid that may be a legal Pandora's box. Maybe town council can comment on whether a system like that might run afoul of the election laws or the...
Strikes me as another form of the placards that we put out announcing people to people that there's an election coming up. But just a question.
Okay.
Certainly bring it to the advisory committee's attention in the next budget cycle.
Mr. Moore?
Bruce Moore, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 9. I'd like to follow up on the question about the Beacon Street reconstruction project, specifically how it relates to traffic flow. I recollect sitting at meetings 7-8 years ago, I think it was, when the original planning process began. One of the things that we were sold on was the fact that it would expedite traffic flow and at the same time also expedite pedestrian ability to cross safely Harvard Street, at Harvard Street and the whole Coolidge Corner area, and for that matter, the whole stretch of Beacon Street. It seems to me that the major part of the construction was completed about a year or maybe longer ago. And I guess I'm a little bit distressed to hear that it will take months longer to try to deal with the problems that have been created. Specifically, I've timed the lights at Hawes Street. The light at Hawes Street is red on Beacon Street heading outbound, about 1.5 to almost 2 times longer than it is on Beacon Street at Coolidge Corner at Harvard Street. That's a hard thing to understand given the amount of cross traffic at Hawes Street compared to the amount of cross traffic at Harvard Street. Several hours every day, virtually 7 days a week at this point, the outbound traffic lanes on Beacon Street are blocked at Harvard Street. They're blocked because the timing of the light at Babcock Street is off. There's a serious problem with that, which apparently is known to people in the traffic department. So as a result, you have a backup of traffic blocking Beacon Street, which creates all kinds of safety problems for pedestrians. In addition, the traffic is not stopped long enough on Beacon Street to allow pedestrians, particularly the elderly, to cross across Beacon Street at Harvard, essentially going from the CVS to the Bank of America, so that people get caught in the middle and the traffic is backed up. Is there any way that based upon safety concerns, based upon traffic flow, based upon transportation egress, something can be speeded up? I put that, I'll just one other comment. I put that in the context of the fact that I have served on 3 committees over about a 20-year period of time that have been charged with looking at specifically the Center Street parking lot and in general traffic, transportation issues in Coolidge Corner. Each time the issue comes back, each time the committee gets formed, comes to the conclusion that there are serious enough problems with traffic flow throughout Coolidge Corner to raise serious questions about the ability of that neighborhood to stand significant development. In my estimation, and I suspect the estimation of virtually everybody sitting in this room, the experience that we have all had on Beacon Street in the last year brings the question even further forward in terms of the ability of that intersection to be able to deal with traffic flow. Is there nothing that can be done prior to the state signing?
Why don't we let Mr. DeMaio respond to you, sir?
Fine.
I guess the only way I can answer that is that the project is not done. The contractor is out there now. He made a number of corrections this week. They've started to pour concrete in some of the areas that weren't accepted. So the construction continues. They did finish a year ahead of time. However, there's an extensive punch list that the town of Brookline and the Commissioner of Public Works will not sign off on the project until that punch list is complete. Relative to traffic congestion and everything, there are a lot of variables that cause traffic congestion. Double parked cars, delivery trucks, and things of that situation. Other than that, we have some favorable reports from residents who think that the traffic is moving more smoothly on Beacon Street than it did before. It was a major project. It was a big investment of the state in that project, and I think once the timing of the lights is complete, you'll be satisfied.
Can I follow up and ask the question of, if the traffic is continuously backed up on Beacon Street heading outbound, as it is, and I think as people in the department recognize, I talked with somebody last week about that, why can't somebody go out even before the contract is signed off on and retime lights if it is in the interest of public safety?
Well, Mr. DeMaio, the question Mr. Moore is asking is that specific problem addressed by your retiming the lights that we're waiting to have materialize?
Once the lights are retimed, then the problem will be solved. We cannot time the lights until the state and the contractor and the town of Brookline sign off on it.
I guess I'm confused. I don't really understand why the state or the contractor can't retime the lights. Why can't they stand out there on a Saturday afternoon or any day from about 3 o'clock to 6 o'clock and view the problem that has been created by the timing of the light, which has been that way for 1 year now, since last spring? It seems to me that 1 year of putting up with a problem of that magnitude should not be a difficult problem to retime. I mean, I'd be happy to go out with anybody. I'll even bring my own screwdriver. And we can go out tonight after town meeting, and even I'll turn the screw and retime the light. Now, I know it's complicated, and it's computerized and all the rest of that. But, I'm being a little facetious, but it just seems like this can't be that big a problem, that it's taken a year and state contractors and 2 additional months to deal with a problem that every single person in this hall
Well,
has dealt
Mr. Moore, Mr. DeMaio has said that this problem, the specific problem to which you allude, will be cured, in his estimation, by the retiming of the lights. The legal requirements for retiming cannot be fulfilled for another couple of months, and I'm afraid you're just going to have to be patient. Ms. Carroll?
Carol, Precinct 8. I have a question that I think deals with the building inspector and the transportation department. And it has to do with when someone comes and applies for a permit, a contractor, is he referred to the transportation department to also get a permit for parking I ask this because of an ugly experience we personally had in our first day. We were having a contractor work in our house. They all three received parking tickets, and they had never been told when they got a permit to work on the house that they needed to also get a parking permit. And I was wondering if this idea had been implemented by the building inspector in the transportation department.
Well, I'm not sure whether Mr. Shepard or Mr. Levine is the proper person to answer that, but could we have one
To
of
my
the other?
knowledge, the building department refers them to Public Works, and Public Works will issue them a temporary parking permit. They put a sign, and if they occupy a meter, they pay for the use of that meter for the day or for 2 days.
Thank you, Mr. Levitan.
Fred Levitan, Precinct 14. Mr. Moderator, can we hear from Mr. Ditto as to whether there is an interconnection between the Babcock Street light on Harvard Street and the Beacon Street light? And
Mr. Ditto?
If the answer is no, can Beacon Street be resolved without that?
The answer is no, and it's certainly something we need to look at.
Mr. Farlow?
Mr. Moderator, Frank Farlow, Precinct 4. I'd like to return to the Coolidge Corner intersection and ask that you address a question to someone from the Transportation Board. About very roughly 10 years ago, the part of Harvard Street in front of the Booksmith and some length toward Alston beyond that was made one lane in each direction. At the time, I applauded that move because I had time and again a fantasy of shotgunning the people who double parked in front of the Videosmith. But Videosmith is gone, and I no longer have the same viewpoint concerning the 10-year experiment of reducing that part of Harvard Street to 2 lanes. Under the best of circumstances, after all the retiming of lights is accomplished, it will remain the case that there are 4 lanes coming into that intersection from the direction of the village and headed toward Alston Brighton. And as they come out of that intersection, they have to neck down into 2 lanes. Now, I beg your pardon, there are 2 lanes coming in and 1 lane going out. And as a result, I have learned the expression, and I suspect a number of others here have, don't block the box. We could, of course, pay a cop to stand there full time, because it's not just a rush hour by any means that causes an extreme problem. And several of my progressive friends have occasion to stand in that intersection of a Saturday afternoon and observe that at close hand. I would ask of the Transportation Board what they currently make of this 10-year experiment that started with the narrowing of that lane out of Coolidge Corner, and what, if any, thought is being given to reversing that decision. I have personally watched more than once in the last 2 weeks the 2 lanes coming out of Boston on Beacon Street have 2 cars get through on a green light because the box is blocked to a fairly well.
And Mr. Ditto?
One of the things we're looking at is that when you're heading north on Harvard Street towards Alston, there are 2 lanes that cross Beacon Street. And as you rightfully say, those 2 lanes mesh into 1. And that's a choke point. One thing we're looking at, we're trying to evaluate right now, is making the right-hand lane on Harvard Street a right turn only at the bank. But what we're trying to do is evaluate how that's going to affect the intersection with Longwood Ave all the way back to Sewell. So there are a lot of parameters in changing this intersection. Obviously, trying to get the maximum out of the timing of the lights, but also trying to get the people to basically obey some of the lights. I'm sure you've seen the people who enter that box when there's a yellow light, when they should be stopped at Harvard Street. So there's a whole parameter of things that we have to look at in order to make that intersection work.
I hope you're satisfied, Mr. Farlow. It took you 5 minutes to ask the question. Yes, ma'am.
Ingrid Cooper, Precinct 4. I happen to work right in the SS Pierce building, right above the clock. And I can tell you that what I have observed in the past year is that Coolidge Corner has become a horrendous nightmare. The traffic patterns and the pedestrian patterns between 3 and 6 o'clock every single day are just a nightmare. People get incensed, they're honking like mad, they're cursing, swearing, getting out of their cars at each other sometimes. The traffic patterns are simply not working, either for pedestrians or for drivers. People get completely messed up in the intersection, legitimately trying to get through, or whether they try and go through on yellow lights or not. They don't always make it through. Sometimes, as Frank said, only 2 cars get through a light. People get frustrated. They get enraged. I have found that when I try to go from Brookline Village to my office, I now have to drive a labyrinthine pattern that is the likes of which have added miles to my making that simple commute. And I think that this pattern needs to be very thoroughly re-examined. Any move you want to make in that area for about a 4-6 block area is now 3 times more difficult than it ever was before this new pattern was instituted. And I would really like to understand whether it's just a matter of the timing of the lights, because it certainly does not appear to be the case, or if it's also that the traffic patterns need to be more closely examined, because they're not working. They're absolutely not working.
Well, Mr. Ditto, if you want to respond in any fashion to Ms. Cooper, I think the lesson to you and Mr. DeMeo should be crystal clear at this point from what you've heard from Mr. Farlow and Ms. Cooper and so forth, that you have a problem at Coolidge Corner that needs to be addressed. And if you're changing the timing of the lights doesn't fix it, I don't want to go through this same discussion a year from now. Mr. O'Neill?
Donnell O'Neill, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 4. I just have a question. I guess Peter can answer it. Mr. Ditto, actually. If a traffic light goes out on Beacon Street or Harvard, who's in charge of fixing it? Is it the state or is it us?
Mr. Ditto?
It's still under the jurisdiction of the state.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Moderator, Jane Gilman, Precinct 3.
Sorry?
Jane Gilman, Precinct 3. Further to the intersection in Coolidge Corner, while we're waiting for changing the timing of the lights and so forth, I wonder if there's some way to, it really is a circus there, and no one has mentioned the fact that the trolley gets stuck and can't proceed up Beacon Street because of people blocking the box. My question is, would it be possible to ticket people who are in violation of the lights as they stand now?
Chief O'Leary?
The short answer is yes. The more difficult answer is it fair when you know it's being caused not necessarily by the driver's actions, but perhaps by a mechanical problem that needs to be fixed? So we have thought about doing a block the box enforcement effort up there. It is our intent, once the lights get straightened out, to go in there with a block-the-box effort. I think if I hear from the town meeting tonight that that's what they want, a little bit more stepped-up enforcement in there, I think we can do that. But I do want to say that when we discussed it as an organization, we felt that there was some other mitigating factors other than just drivers entering the intersection at the end of a light cycle.
Yes, go ahead.
With all due respect, I'm not sure it's a question of fairness, that people are frustrated and so they block the box. They are running red lights because they're just so impatient and so angry. And I don't think fairness should be the issue. I think it should be public safety and efficiency of traffic.
Okay.
Thank you. Ms. Khan?
Janice Kahn, Precinct 15. I have a question about Skyline Park for Aaron or somebody.
Well, ask your question.
Well, I have two questions. One is, the part of the conceptual plan for Skyline Park was to have trails going around it, and the connection between the entrance from Arlington Road north, heading into the, past the transfer station and over to Skyline Park, is not really isn't well defined. And I was wondering if there are plans or what this time frame is for continuing to develop that. And I have a second question also. I don't know if you want to take.
Chief Galentine, why don't you let's get an answer to your first one.
Erin Galentine, Director of Parks. We actually are going to work on making the stone dust pathway clearer and more defined as it was designed in the original plan.
Okay, great.
Thank you. Next question.
Yeah, the second question I have has to do with dogs running free on Skyline Park. It's not a green dog park. It has artificial turf, and I think that the signage is just inadequate, especially for people who are coming there who aren't from Brookline, who are enjoying use of the park. And actually, it's nice to see many people using the park, not just from Brookline. But I really feel that the signage is absolutely inadequate, and there needs to be a better way to let people know that their dogs cannot run free on the artificial turf.
Thank you. I'll take a look at that.
Thank you. Ms. Jozwicki?
Joyce Jozwicki, Precinct 9. I have a statement and a question unrelated to each other. My statement is I think at the intersection of Harvard and Beacon, we should have a four-way stop so pedestrians can cross, and then a don't walk for cars to go. And my question is, it's my understanding that there's no parking from an intersection in a certain number of feet. And I'm a school bus monitor in my present life, and the school bus literally cannot make the corner at many of the places my bus needs to go because people are parked too close to the curb. I called several times about Atherton and Summit, and that seems to have a lot more enforcement, so the problem seems to be going away. There's still people parked too close to the corner. People park. There are these huge signs that say no parking, school bus loading, and I'm wondering if we can have some more enforcement starting in September. The year is over, but in September, at the dismissal of school at these places where school buses need to be, and maybe get parents to understand that they shouldn't be there. And if we really did some heavy enforcement in September, maybe the problem would go away.
Chief?
We can add that. I know in September we always go out and do a concerted enforcement effort on the going around school buses with the flashing lights, but we can take care of the parking. That won't be a problem.
Daily, I would say on Hammond Street near Heath, 5 to 10 cars pass me as I'm standing out there with a student waving at cars, trying to get them to stop.
Why don't I get the time from you and we'll start on it tomorrow?
Mr. Friedman?
Frank Friedman, Precinct 8.
Not to continue to beat this dead horse, but I think I was the lone voice either last November or last May when I was talking about the timing of the lights, because I was talking specifically about Pleasant and Beacon and how I thought it was worse now than it was when it was manned at rush hour with a police officer prior to the construction project. So I guess I have a couple questions, perhaps if you could address those to the police chief. Number one, I'm just wondering how many tickets have been given for blocking the box at all in Brookline in the past year. In New York, when people get close to an intersection and look like they might get stuck in the box, they get panicked because they know of the severe penalties that they'll face if they get stuck in the box. And then I have a second question.
Can you answer that one, Chief?
I don't have the answer with me. No, I could get it for you. I don't know the
approximation. Small handful, large number.
I wouldn't say a large number.
And my question number two is, until this timing issue can get fixed, I know it's going to cost man hours, but maybe we can get police officers back in the intersections during rush hour to direct traffic and manually do the lights.
The one at which intersection?
The several intersections around Coolidge Corner, where at Coolidge, Harvard, and Beacon, we now have a few more lights than we used to, but they're all backed up, and traffic is just a nightmare.
Okay.
Ms. Heller?
Nancy Heller, Precinct 8. I'd like to ask a question first about the amount of a ticket for blocking an intersection. Do drivers understand that they could be subject to a fine, and what is that fine?
The fine, I'm pretty sure the fine is $100, and they are subject. They enter it and they remain in there when the lights change and they're stuck in there. They are in violation.
Another question on bicycle issues. I don't want to open a Pandora's box, but there are
At this
safety
hour,
issues.
you want to think twice about opening any such box.
Well, we only have one bite at the apple, and the issue is that bicyclists are riding on the sidewalks, and they are, I feel, a danger to pedestrians, especially children and the elderly. It happens in Coolidge Corner, but it's very prevalent along the strip from Harvard Street to Washington on School Street, and also from Washington to Route 9 on Cypress. And I'm wondering, is there any enforcement going on? People, when I mention to a cyclist that they're supposed to be riding in the street, many of them look at me and say, "Oh, really? I didn't know that." So, do we have any education efforts? Are there any enforcement? At least warnings given to people so that they'll know that they're not supposed to do it again.
We have
Chief?
done.
Go ahead.
We have done the educational efforts, mostly aimed at students and kids in schools.
These are not students. These are commuters.
Right. We have done some enforcement, not a lot. I know that the laws on bicycles, riding on bicycles, having to identify yourself, have recently changed. That would allow us to do a little bit more, but we have not gone into the business districts and done that.
Ms. Frawley?
Regina Frawley, Precinct 16. I'm not sure who should answer this question.
Well, ask your question,
I
please.
will. A year ago, just after town meeting, we probably grew the foot size of our carbon footprint about an inch.
I can't really hear you, Ms. Frawley.
Is that better?
Yeah.
About a year ago, just after town meeting, in fact, we grew the footprint, the carbon footprint, in town meeting on the emails roughly about an inch, arguing about the discomfort in the audience because of the heat. It's obviously been solved, and I want to be the first to publicly thank whoever solved it. My question is, who solved it? And one of the biggest arguments was how much it would cost. Could we get an idea of how much it costs to solve this problem?
You're talking about the heat problem that we had? God solved it this year.
I can't hear you. I can't hear you.
Well, it has a lot to do with the weather, Ms. Frawley.
No, I don't think so. It's actually very chilly here tonight, and I'm enjoying it.
What was done, thanks to the school department and Mr. Rowe in particular, is that these fans were installed to circulate the air, and that always has a beneficial effect when it's too warm out.
And
They're
how
very
much-
cooperative.
It's wonderful. How much did it cost?
Well, I'm not sure how much it cost, but it was. These were installed without a murmur of objection, so couldn't have cost very much.
I actually expected that answer. Thank you.
Yeah, Mr. Spiegel.
Stanley Spiegel from Precinct 2. 2 quick points. With regard to the bicycles on the sidewalk, Cambridge has managed to solve that in Harvard Square where there are tons of students with bikes. One thing they do is they have a stencil that goes on the handicapped access ramps painted with a bicycle signal with the crossbar through it indicating bikes are not allowed. I don't know if that would help, but it couldn't be too expensive. The second, and I think it would be worth doing in Coolidge Corner and elsewhere. The second point, which hasn't been mentioned, I think, with regard to the intersection at Coolidge Corner, is the impact on businesses. I think persons would have to be almost out of their mind to come to Coolidge Corner at certain places to frequent the businesses. We are interested in supporting our business community, and I would really like to see this not only for pedestrians, not only for commuters, but for the sake of local businesses who need to have people feel that they can come comfortably, find parking and shop, rather than be in gridlock. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Spiegel. Mr. Benka?
Yes, Dick Benka, Board of Selectmen. I just wanted to make one comment in defense of DPW and Commissioner DeMayo with respect to the Beacon Street project. I'm the Selectmen's representative on the Commission for the Disabled, and one of the issues that arose with Beacon Street is handicapped access. The state's contractor left a number of serious deficiencies with regard to ramps, locations of signals, push buttons for signals, and so forth, that have to be resolved before the town takes the project back. In fact, there are some significant issues that are going to the Architectural Barriers Board for an advisory opinion before we take the project back. If we took the project back before getting these problems resolved, the fix for those projects would be on the town's nickel and not on the state's. So DPW is not arbitrarily delaying, but there are some significant issues that have to be resolved, and they're really approaching those in a responsible fashion.
Thank you, Mr. Benka. I think we're now done with the Public Works budget, and we can move along to library, $3,465,937. Yes, sir.
John Grand, Precinct 12. Mr. Moderator, at the last town meeting, we appropriated something approximately $600,000 to upgrade the technology and join other cities and towns to upgrade. Could we get an update on whether those monies were expended?
Are you talking about the RFID system, sir?
Yes, sir.
It's $450,000. Has that been spent?
Chuck Flaherty, Library Director. Since we were last here in the fall, we completed work on the RFP. We met with the Oversight Committee that was established by vote of town meeting. The RFP was issued. A contractor was selected. That vendor, the contract was then negotiated, signed by the selectmen in April. We're expecting delivery of our first equipment within the next week. Training is scheduled for the 4th of June. We placed an initial order. It will take us approximately 5 or 6 months to tag our collection, and we're hoping that we'll be implementing the system prior to the end of the fiscal year. At the same time, Cambridge and Wellesley are moving forward with projects.
Mr. Flaherty, all he's interested in is Brookline.
Sir, Mr. Moderator, I wanted to know what was the total amount of money that we expended?
Wasn't it 450?
The allocation was $465,000. We have not completed our acquisitions as yet. We have made no payments as yet because we have not received any equipment, hardware, software as yet.
Thank you.
Thank you. Health Department, $1,099,574. Veteran Services, $241,409. Council on Aging, $762,772.
Mr. Moderator.
Mr. Ross.
Regarding Council on Aging, having...
We all are, aren't we?
Yes, Joe Ross, Precinct 12. Having become a senior citizen within the past few years, see, that's why I don't remember to identify myself. I am apparently eligible to use the programs at the senior center, but I can't because I haven't retired yet, and they're only open during the workday. I wonder whether anything can be done about having some programs for the many senior citizens in Brookline who still work during the day.
Ms. Dobek? Mr. Kelleher?
Rich Kelleher, Town Administrator. The Council on Aging has been easing its way toward occasional non-weekday programming, and we will get an update to you, Joe, from Ruth Ann as to what the future specific plans are going to be in that regard.
Human Relations, $101,870. Recreation, $972,808. Personnel Service Reserve, $750,000. Collective Bargaining Town, $960,000. That completes the town departmental budgets, and we move to the schools. $68,974,271. Dr. Friedman.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
And
Paula
Dr.
Friedman, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 14. I have a question about the illustration on page 8.8. It is my understanding that there's an agreement between the town and the school system where 50% of the town's budget is allocated for the school system. We all appreciate the quality of our public school system in Brookline. In these economic times, we've heard many issues this evening already that require funding and where budgets have been cut. It appears to me that, according to this diagram, the education system is getting 54.5%, not 50%. I'd like to have an explanation.
Mr. Kelleher.
If I'm understanding it correctly.
Sure. The agreement in the town-school partnership regarding the budget is that when revenue increases are available to the town, those are shared on a 50-50 basis, subject to the impact of respective fixed costs. And one of the items that's considered as a fixed cost in the formula is special education, which results in an allocation to the schools in terms of new revenue that's actually a little higher than 50-50 because of that fixed cost consideration. But the base budget, the overall share of the existing budget base between the schools and the town is not divided on a pure 50-50 basis. It's the new revenue that comes in subject to fixed costs. I hope that answers your question, Paul.
Well, what is the formula for the base budget allocation?
There really isn't a formula for the budget base. The formula has to do with the new revenue that's coming into a town for any given year from property taxes, fees, fines, state aid, that type of thing. And I'd be happy to go into it in more detail with you after the meeting.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. We now proceed to non-departmental expenditures. Employee benefits, $40,270,929. On page 8-64, reserve fund, $1,834,186. Mr. Ross.
Mr. Moderator, Joe Ross, Precinct 12. Back on employee benefits. Yes, group health. I'm wondering about the fact that while we keep trying to join the GIC, and it requires 70% of the town unions to do so, I hear that we could have saved quite a bit of money on group health by joining one of the healthcare consortiums that many towns belong to, and some of them are very happy about it, and they even say they don't want to join GIC, they like what they've got. And I wonder whether any efforts have been made to join the consortium. I hear it wouldn't take 70% of town employees to approve, and we could have been saving quite a bit of money for several years if we joined.
Mr. Kelleher?
2 years ago, the Board of Selectmen accepted the provision under Chapter 32B, which involves what's called coalition bargaining. And any change that's going to take place for group health, whether it's to the GIC, to the West Suburban Health Group, or anything else, requires approval of 70% of that coalition, which is called the Public Employee Committee. In terms of the West Suburban Health Group, the communities that are realizing savings that are approximate to those that are available through the GIC are those that are utilizing what's called a rate saver set of programs, which also have a set of co-pays and deductibles that approximate those of the GIC. And that's the core issue we need to resolve with the unions in moving ahead with any program. What level of plan design change will take place that's acceptable to the unions in the bargaining process?
Thank you.
Follow up, Mr. Moderator?
Go ahead.
I guess the question becomes, why do the selectmen accept coalition bargaining when it sounds as though we could have joined West Suburban without that, and it would have been easier, and we would have saved money.
We have to get the consent of the unions to go either way. Isn't that correct, Mr. Keller?
Well, but we didn't necessarily have to have coalition bargaining.
Actually, under traditional bargaining, there's a requirement for agreement from all of the unions. There's really a serial bargaining process that goes on that requires 100% consensus before a major change can be made if you use a non-coalition bargaining approach.
Ms. Cohen?
Susan Cohen, Precinct 7. Susan Cohen, Precinct 7. I'd like to know why we continue to only do business with Blue Cross. Why aren't we taking bids from all the carriers? Why are we insisting on going with the most expensive carrier?
Mr. Kelleher?
The change made about 4 years ago to consolidate into one health plan resulted from a bid process. The town put out an RFP. Blue Cross came in with rates in that process that were lower than Harvard Pilgrim's. Harvard Pilgrim at that time tried to catch up with Blue Cross, but actually in the review framework that was set up with the unions, ultimately at the end of the day, Blue Cross Blue Shield was a better business decision at that time. Again, savings in group health ultimately are going to depend upon changes in plan design, so whether it's a Blue Cross card or a Harvard Pilgrim card or cards issued through the GIC, if there aren't changes made in the overall plan design, there won't be significant premium savings that can be realized.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
Chris Koch, Precinct 10. We heard that there's progress in the negotiations on the GIC. Can we get a little more detail on that? Are we at all close? Are we very far apart? How are the negotiations going?
Well, just to recap quickly, last year we went through another RFP process to get very current numbers from the insurance industry and compare them to the GIC so that there were real numbers to use. That had us bumping up against the end-of-year timelines in terms of trying to reach a deal, and there was not an agreement reached. The selectmen authorized me to send a letter to the Public Employee Committee in early March, stressing the urgency of not letting time slide this year. Let's get going with the negotiations so we don't run the risk of bumping into the end-of-year deadlines. The PEC was very responsive. There was a meeting held before the end of that month. There have been multiple meetings since, and the negotiations are ongoing. But as with any collective bargaining, I simply wouldn't be doing justice to the process if I were disclosing details as to what was going on at the bargaining table.
Yes, Ms. Cohen, I'm sorry. You had another question?
I just have one more question. I was told today by someone in Wellesley that the town of Brookline has until November to write a letter stating that they want to join the West Suburban Health Consortium. And if they do it by then it goes to a vote by the consortium, and we could get onto it in July of 2010. And every year I sit here and I listen to speakers talk about GIC, but we're no closer to getting GIC now than we were 2 years ago. And I don't see why the town isn't interested in saving money, since healthcare costs are the major problem with most towns in the Commonwealth. So anything that we do that can save money, I don't see why we're not doing it.
Mr. Kelleher?
Just the West Suburban option has been on the negotiating table. We have gone back and forth on that. I do want to make the observation, when the board accepted Section 19 and went into coalition bargaining 2 years ago, there were changes made in the town plan design that avoided over $1 million of premium increases at that point. Co-pays for office visits were doubled, prescription drug co-pays were doubled, inpatient, outpatient co-pays were established for the first time for really any municipality in Greater Boston. So I think to convey the impression that things haven't been moving is not completely fair. They haven't been moving as quickly as any of us would like, but there has been movement that's been taking place.
Thank you. Moving along, Reserve Fund, $834,186. Mr. Farlow.
Frank Farlow, Precinct 4. Mr. Moderator, could you or someone else remind us why, after about a decade, at about $700,000 or $800,000 2 years ago, this item was tripled?
Well, I certainly can't. I'm not sure your historical analysis is correct. Mr. Keller?
Yeah, the reserve fund is set as 1%, equal to 1% of the prior year's net revenue. It's been that formula really for the last several years. Immediately after the override in '94, the reserves by the board at that point were set at 1.5% of the prior year's net revenue, and the percentage has actually been decreased in the years since that.
Well, I think what Mr. Farlow is referring to, Mr. Kelleher, is the $600,000 number under FY07, 775, and FY08, and all of a sudden there's a jump to 1.7.
Sorry, Frank. I was talking over here when you were asking the question. Those are actuals. For the current fiscal year, once the reserve fund transfer is pursued by Public Works to deal with the snow and ice deficit for this current fiscal year, the DPW has to go to the advisory committee and the Board of Selectmen for approval. The amount expended from the reserve fund this year will be approaching about 2/3 of the total allocation that was set aside for the current fiscal year. So it varies from year to year. I'm sorry I didn't get the question initially.
Mr. Davis, do you have a question?
On item 26. We're not there yet.
Okay, we're there. Item 26, Liability Catastrophe Fund.
Yes,
$1,443,397. Mr. Davis?
Jonathan Davis, Precinct 10. Could the town astronomer explain if there's a meteor heading towards Brookline, and in lieu of that, could we have an explanation as to why the FY09 budget for the catastrophe fund is $300,000 approximately, but the budget for FY10 is $1,400,000?
Mr. Cronin?
Sean Cronin, Deputy Town Administrator. The policy for that is that it equals 1% of the prior year net revenue. And in the current fiscal year, there was a very heavy drawdown of $1.32 million related with the Newton Street project that was talked about some time ago. So in order to bring that appropriation back up to 1% of the prior year net revenue, it requires that large increase that you see.
Thank you, sir. General insurance, $286,198. Audit, professional services, $138,987. Contingency fund, $15,000. Out-of-state travel, $3,000.
Mr. Moderator?
Mr. Burstein?
Michael Burstein, Precinct 12. I'd like to ask my usual annual question, just what out-of-state travel did we do this year? And I'd like to volunteer for that position of town astronomer if it's still open.
How about measures of wood and bark instead? Well, what out-of-state travel was there?
This account is available to administrative departments throughout the organization. This is the totality of it. For purposes of administrative departments, town council, I believe year before last, was at a conference in New Hampshire. I believe Chuck, for library purposes, may have drawn on this account. So it varies from year to year. I think the out-of-state travel in this regard is really very modest under the circumstances.
Mr. Moderator, I agree with Mr. Kelleher that it's modest. I'm curious, what did we do this past fiscal year? I just want to know if you have any ideas.
I'll check with the comptroller and get an accounting and get it to you, Michael.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Now, ladies and gentlemen, I am reminded that it has become traditional when we reach the school budget, which after all is $68 million, to have a short presentation from from the superintendent, and I breezed right over that this year. I apologize, and so I ask your indulgence if we could have a 5-minute presentation by Dr. Lupini. We'd all be more enlightened about this huge budget. Dr. Lupini? You can demur if you wish, sir.
They said I should tell you that we shredded the speech after you had no questions. No, I mean the budget is as you've seen. The one thing I do want to spend a minute pointing out is just about the growth factor. I mean, in addition to everything that you've heard about what we're facing in state and local revenues and expenses, is our growth. We're projecting right now somewhere between 570 and 585. That's revised as of today. Kindergarten students for next year. That will be, out of these past 4 years where we've seen tremendous growth, that will be the largest of those growth years. And we already believe, although we have some contingencies built into this spending plan, we already believe that we're short by at least one section and maybe two. And some questions were asked earlier about where we see those students going in the long term. For next year, we believe we have space. But in the following year, we'll clearly be adding portable classrooms to handle those sections. What we're seeing now is a decline at the high school in terms of enrollment. We're going to bottom out at about 1,600 students, and then very quickly over a 4-year period, when some of these groups begin to get into the upper elementary and then go on to high school, we're going to go from 1,600 to about 2,150 or so over the course of about 4 years. And so if we don't see a corresponding drop in the elementary enrollments in those time, we will have problems with staffing in terms of having to add staff at the high school. That's where our savings is now. We've been able to cut some positions out of the high school budget over the last few years. Along with, if we don't see a drop, we'll have to maintain the elementary staffing that we have now. So we have some years of challenge ahead of us. We're trying to address in this spending plan some of the longer term issues by trying to do some things different. We have a plan to revise the way we administer special education in terms of a team chairperson model that replaces the administrative model that we have in place. We clearly believe that we through that model have better service for parents, for our students, and that we reduce our costs, and we need to do that. We're in conversation with a couple of private schools, Landmark among them, about doing some programming here in Brookline. We're trying to cut down on our out-of-district placements in that way. So we're trying to look at some opportunities in next year's budget where we have proposed some increases, even though we're looking at cuts across the board, in order to cut down on longer-term costs. Okay, thanks for giving me a couple minutes.
Thank you, Dr. Lupini. Okay, we're almost through the budget article, and I'd like to finish up. Line 31, printing of warrants and reports, $20,000. Massachusetts Municipal Association dues, $11,820.
Mr. Moderator?
Yes. Mr. Ross?
I asked a question a few years ago. I'd like to ask it again. What does the Mass Municipal Association do for Brookline? Especially what have they been doing for Brookline lately?
Mr. Keller?
The MMA is the single loudest voice in Beacon Hill for the cities and towns, and one of the things that Chairman Daley referenced in her budget message is that there is the possibility for cities and towns to be granted local option taxing authority for a meals tax. That has been a priority of the MMA for years. As with many things, it's taken much longer than any of us would have liked to have seen for it to be enacted. Whether it's adopted locally will be up to town meeting, but it becomes an important potential tool for municipalities dealing with the fiscal issues that have been described in such great detail during this meeting. So that's just one example, Joe, of the kind of ongoing grind that the MMA brings to Beacon Hill as the voice of the cities and towns.
Thank you.
Mr. Cotney?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. David Cotney, Precinct 12. Somewhat related to an earlier point by Ms. Kaplan. When I get the email from the town regarding issues like the posting of the warrant or the budget, I go online and read these documents, and if I have to, I'll print out some relevant pages. And as informative as all these documents are, it seems like for people like me who tend to read these things online, a waste of paper and an unnecessary expense. So it related to line 31, printing of warrants and reports. I'm wondering if we could have some type of opt-out system for town meeting members who wish to opt out of certain documents like the posted warrant, the budget book, the annual report, the CIP. I know that obviously the combined reports are somewhat necessary for our activities here, but some of us could do without all of the paper and take care of this online.
Well, I can tell you that the printing of warrants, the rules relating to the printing and publication of warrants are state law, matters of state law, and can't be interfered with. As to other suggestions, I suggest you take them up with the town clerk's office.
Thank you,
all right?
Mr. Moderator.
Borrowing, $12,572,215. Okay, we have now been through a total of $56,595,732 of non-departmental expenditures. And the total of the general appropriations that we have labored through is that $187,832,429, which, when added to the special appropriations, which are listed at the bottom of page 8-64 and over to 8-65, which are the capital, for the most part, items that we went through laboriously earlier in the evening. The total appropriated expenditures are $197,093,001, to which, for purposes of our total budget, are added expenditures over which town meeting has no control, and those are the cherry sheet offsets, state and county charges, overlay, and tax titles and so forth, listed directly below that. And the total budget, which we will now vote on, is $204,423,535. Those in favor, please raise your hands. Those opposed? The vote is 178 to 1. The motion carries. I will now entertain a motion to adjourn until 7 o'clock tomorrow evening. Is there a second? Those in favor, please say aye. Those opposed, no. Motion carries. Adjourned until 7 o'clock tomorrow evening. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Seats come.